The Northern Territories had not witnessed an execution in 3 months, and that terrified them more than bloodshed ever could. Duke Cadric Raventhorn sat motionless at the head of the council table, while men twice his age swallowed their fear and waited for permission to breathe. Outside Blackmoor Keep, winter storms tore across the cliffs with the kind of violence that made soldiers wonder if the gods themselves were trying to wash this fortress into the frozen sea below. But inside the war chamber, nothing moved except candlelight dancing across steel-gray eyes that had stopped pretending to feel human years ago. They said the Duke had gone soft. They said a woman's presence in his bed had finally cracked the monster's spine. They were about to discover exactly how wrong dead men could be. Stay with me through what comes next, because this is the story of how power devours the people who wield it, and what happens when a man built entirely from violence tries to remember what it felt like to want something other than control. You will see blood. You will see betrayal. And you will see a love so damaged it could only survive in a kingdom that had forgotten the difference between devotion and destruction. This is where it begins. The morning Seraphina Vale arrived at Blackmoor Keep, the castle smelled like iron and rotting wood. Cadric stood at the narrow window of his private chambers and watched the carriage wheels carve through mud 3 stories below. Rain hammered the courtyard stones. Guards flanked the vehicle with crossbows drawn, because even a political bride required an armed escort in the north. The king's seal marked the carriage door in faded gold, cracked from too many miles on roads that swallowed lesser travelers whole. Behind him, Commander Garrick cleared his throat. The sound scraped against Cadric's patience like a blade against bone. Let him wait. The Duke counted the seconds between lightning strikes. 12. 13. Thunder rolled across the cliffs hard enough to rattle the leaded glass. Somewhere in the fortress below, servants scrambled to prepare rooms no one had occupied since Cadric's mother died screaming in childbirth 28 years ago. They would scrub the floors, hang fresh tapestries, light candles in windows that had stayed dark through a decade of winter nights. All of it meaningless theater for a woman who would learn quickly that Blackmoor Keep was not a home. It was a tomb where people still had pulses. Your Grace. Garrick's voice carried the particular strain of a man who understood he was interrupting something dangerous. Lady Seraphina has arrived. The steward requests your presence in the main hall. Cadric did not turn from the window. Tell the steward I will arrive when it pleases me. She is the king's guest, my lord. Protocol demands protocol. The word left Cadric's mouth with the kind of quiet that made grown men reconsider their life choices. You believe protocol matters inside these walls? Garrick went silent. Smart man. Cadric finally turned. The commander stood near the doorway with his hand resting carefully away from his sword hilt, shoulders squared in a posture that suggested loyalty, but knew better than to assume safety. Garrick had served House Raventhorn for 15 years. He had watched Cadric transform from a furious boy with his father's blood still wet on his hands into the most feared man in Valadorn. He knew exactly what lived behind those steel-gray eyes. How does she look? Cadric asked. Cold, wet, angry, frightened? Garrick hesitated. No, Your Grace. Interesting. Cadric crossed the chamber and retrieved his coat from the chair beside the dead hearth. Black wool lined with silver thread, military cut, designed to remind anyone who saw it that the Duke of Blackmoor had spent more years on battlefields than in ballrooms. He fastened the buttons with mechanical precision while his mind worked through the angles. The king had sent him a bride, not a request, not an offer. A command wrapped in silk and desperation, because the crown needed Blackmoor's armies, and the royal treasury could no longer afford to keep the Northern Territories loyal through gold alone. So they had tried a woman instead. Typical. What do you know about House Vale? Cadric asked. Garrick shifted his weight. Disgraced 3 years ago when Lord Edmund Vale was caught selling grain shipments meant for the southern provinces. He claimed the crown owed him reimbursement for losses during the border conflicts. The king disagreed. Vale lost his lands, his titles, and his head. And the daughter? Survived. Spent 2 years in a convent before the crown pulled her out for this arrangement. No scandals, no lovers, no children, no leverage. Precisely, my lord. Pardon. Kedrick moved toward the door. Garrick stepped aside without being asked. The hallway beyond stretched long and narrow, lined with portraits of dead Raventhorns who had ruled the North through blood and brutality for 6 generations. Kedrick's grandfather stared down from the canvas nearest the stairs, his expression frozen in the particular cruelty that came from understanding power required sacrifice. Kedrick had learned that lesson young. He descended the spiral staircase with Garrick following 3 steps behind. The main hall waited at the bottom, a vast space built from stone blocks hauled up the cliffs by men who died before the mortar dried. Torches burned in iron sconces along the walls. Servants lined the edges of the room like ghosts, their faces carefully blank. And in the center of it all stood Lady Seraphina Vale. She was not what Kedrick expected. Most women sent to Blackmoor arrived drowning in silk and jewels, their beauty weaponized by families desperate to secure influence through marriage. They wept. They trembled. They performed fragility with the precision of actresses who understood their survival depended on appearing helpless. Seraphina looked like she had walked through a war. Her traveling cloak hung heavy with rain, dark gray wool streaked with mud from the road. Wet hair clung to her face in strands that might have been elegant once, but now just looked exhausted. No cosmetics, no perfume. Her dress beneath the cloak was simple linen, practical rather than decorative. The kind of garment that suggested she had dressed for survival instead of seduction. But her eyes, those were the problem. Dark green flecked with gold, sharp as broken glass, and absolutely unafraid. She watched Kedrick descend the final steps with the kind of assessment usually reserved for enemies across a battlefield. Not the calculated interest of a noblewoman evaluating her political value. Not the fear of a prisoner awaiting sentence. She looked at him like he was a puzzle she intended to solve. Kedrick stopped 10 feet away. The hall went silent except for rain hammering against the narrow windows high above. Servants held their breath. Guards gripped their weapons a fraction tighter. Garrick positioned himself near the staircase with the practiced stillness of a man who had witnessed the Duke dismantle people for smaller provocations than breathing too loud. Lady Seraphina. Kedrick's voice carried through the hall without rising above conversational volume. Welcome to Blackmoor Keep. She did not curtsy. Duke Raventhorn. Her accent was educated Southern aristocracy with an edge of something rougher underneath, like velvet wrapped around steel. I was told you would greet me upon arrival. I have been standing here for 20 minutes. Beside the doorway, the steward flinched. Kedrick felt something shift behind his ribs. Not anger, something colder. The roads from the capital are difficult this time of year, he said. I trust your journey was not too unpleasant. I was locked inside a carriage for 11 days with a chambermaid who wept continuously and 2 guards who smelled like they had not bathed since autumn. The roads were the least unpleasant part. Someone in the hall made a strangled sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Kedrick's expression did not change. You will find Blackmoor Keep operates differently than the royal court, he said. Here we value obedience over wit. Seraphina's gaze sharpened. Then you must spend a great deal of time disappointed. The tension in the hall pulled so tight it could have shattered bone. Kedrick stepped forward, 1 pace, 2, close enough that Seraphina would have to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Most people looked away when the Duke of Blackmoor entered their personal space. Most people understood that proximity was a threat all on its own. Seraphina held his gaze without blinking. The king sent you here as part of an alliance between the crown and the northern territories, Kedrick said quietly. You're expected to conduct yourself with appropriate decorum. That means you will speak when spoken to. You will obey the rules of this household, and you will remember that Blackmoor Keep is not a palace where aristocratic games are rewarded. I understand perfectly, Your Grace. Do you? Yes. Her voice dropped lower, sharp enough to cut. You want me silent, decorative, compliant. Another possession you can display when it serves your political interests and ignore when it does not. Kedrick felt the dangerous heat building beneath his sternum, the thing that lived inside him, the part that had been born the night he slit his father's throat and watched the old Duke choke on his own blood while begging for mercy that never came. You presume too much, my lady. And you underestimate me, Your Grace. The words hung between them like a blade suspended in midair. Kedrick could feel every eye in the hall locked on this moment, waiting, measuring. recording exactly how the Duke of Blackmore would respond to insolence from a woman who had no power, no leverage, and nothing to lose. He smiled. It was not a kind expression. "Commander Garrick will show you to your chambers," Cadric said. "You will remain there until summoned. Food will be brought. A maid will attend to your needs. If you require anything else, you may send word through the steward." "How generous." "I am not generous, Lady Seraphina. I am precise, and you will learn the difference quickly." "Bu oras yemtamasan." He turned and walked toward the corridor that led to his private wing without waiting for her response. Behind him, he heard Garrick issue orders to the guards, heard Seraphina's footsteps echoing across the stone floor as she was escorted toward the eastern tower, where guest chambers had been prepared. Cedric did not look back, but he felt her gaze following him through the shadows. The council convened 3 hours later in the war chamber beneath Blackmore's main keep. 8 men surrounded the scarred oak table that had served 6 generations of Raventhorn dukes. Maps covered the surface, weighted down with daggers at the corners. Candles burned low in their holders, dripping wax onto parchment marked with troop movements and supply routes. Lord Thaddeus Kane sat to Cedric's right, the master of coin who had managed Blackmore's finances for 12 years without stealing enough to warrant execution. Across from him slouched Lord Gregor Ashford, the weapons master whose loyalty extended exactly as far as his salary. Commander Garrick occupied the chair nearest the door, alert as always, one hand resting on the pommel of his sword. The others were lesser nobles and military commanders, men whose names Cedric knew but whose opinions mattered only when they aligned with his own interests. "The grain shipments from the eastern provinces are 3 weeks behind schedule," Kane said, his fingers tapping against the ledger open before him. "If the delays continue, we will need to ration supplies before spring." Cedric studied the map without lifting his gaze. "Then ensure the delays do not continue." "Your Grace, the roads are impassable. The winter storms have destroyed bridges and flooded the low passes. Even with armed escorts, the caravans cannot—" "I did not ask for reasons why it cannot be done, Lord Kane. I asked you to ensure it is done." Kane's jaw tightened. "Yes, Your Grace." "Yes, it is." Beside him, Ashford leaned forward with the posture of a man who enjoyed watching others squirm. "Perhaps we should discuss the king's generous gift," Ashford said. "I hear Lady Seraphina is quite the beauty." The room temperature dropped 5 degrees. "The lady's appearance is irrelevant to this council," Cedric said. "Of course, Your Grace, but the men are talking. They wonder if the Duke of Blackmore has finally softened enough to take a wife." Cedric's hand moved across the table with deliberate slowness. He picked up the dagger pinning the eastern border map and examined the blade with the kind of focus that suggested he was considering where it might do the most damage. "The men wonder many things, Lord Ashford. Most of them are alive because they keep their wondering silent." Ashford's smirk faded. "I meant no offense, Your Grace." "You meant exactly the offense you delivered, but I will allow you to pretend otherwise this time." The dagger returned to the map with enough force to split the wood beneath. Garrick cleared his throat. "If I may, Your Grace, the Crown's intentions with Lady Seraphina's placement here are worth discussing. King Aldrich does not make gestures without purpose." "The Crown wants leverage," Cedric said. "They believe placing a noblewoman in my household will create vulnerability. They think I will grow attached. That attachment will breed sentiment, and sentiment will make me controllable." "Will it?" Cedric looked at Garrick directly. "What do you think, Commander?" "I think the Crown has underestimated you, as always." "Precisely." Kane shifted in his chair. "And what of Lady Seraphina herself? She is the daughter of a traitor. Her family's name is ruined. Does she present any risk?" "Everyone presents risk," Cedric said. "The question is whether the risk is manageable. Is she?" Cedric thought about those green eyes, the way she had refused to lower her gaze, the precise tone in her voice when she called him predictable. Time will tell. The council continued for another hour. They discussed taxes, troop rotations, border disputes with the southern provinces, Lord Merrick's gambling debts, the smuggling operations running through the port cities. Every issue was catalogued, assessed, and assigned to someone responsible for its resolution. Cedric absorbed it all without emotion. This was power, not glory, not honor, just endless management of chaos and the constant calculation of who could be useful and who needed to disappear. When the council finally dissolved, Garrick lingered near the doorway. "A word, Your Grace?" Cadric gestured for him to continue. "Lady Seraphina has requested access to the library." "Denied." "She also asked permission to walk the battlements." "Also denied." Garrick hesitated. "She is not a prisoner, my lord." "No, she is a political instrument placed here by people who want me weakened. Until I understand her purpose, she remains confined. And if she refuses confinement, Caedric stood and moved toward the narrow window overlooking the cliffs. Outside, waves crashed against rock with the kind of violence that never stopped, never tired, never questioned its own nature. "Then she will learn what happens to people who refuse me, Commander." Garrick said nothing for a long moment. "As you wish, Your Grace." He left. Cedric remained at the window and watched darkness swallow the sea. Seraphina did not wait for permission. 2 days after her arrival, she walked out of her chambers and descended the eastern tower stairs without escort. A young maid named Elara trailed behind, whispering frantic warnings about protocols and consequences. Seraphina ignored her. The library occupied the 4th floor of Blackmore's southern wing, a vast room lined with shelves carved from oak that had darkened to near black over centuries. Dust particles drifted through shafts of gray light filtering through the high windows. The smell of old leather and aging paper filled the air. She found Caedric standing near the farthest shelf with a book open in his hands. He did not look up when she entered. "I was told this room was forbidden," Seraphina said. "It is." "Then why are you here?" "Because I own everything inside these walls, including the rules about who may break them." Seraphina crossed the room and stopped beside a reading table stacked with volumes on military strategy. She ran her fingers across the spines. Lord Theron's treatise on siege warfare, General Marcus's principles of command, the histories of the northern campaigns. She glanced at Caedric. "Light reading? Education." "You believe war is the only thing worth studying?" "I believe war is the only thing that matters. Everything else is decoration." Seraphina pulled a volume from the shelf, opened it, flipped through pages without reading. "That is a sad philosophy. Truth is often sad." She set the book down and turned to face him directly. "Why am I here, Duke Raventhorn? You know why. I know what the king told me. I want to know what you believe." Cedric closed his book and studied her with the cold assessment of a man examining a potential threat. "The crown is bankrupt. The southern provinces are on the edge of rebellion. King Aldrich needs my armies to maintain control, but he cannot afford to pay for them, so he sent me you instead. A noblewoman from a disgraced house, expendable enough that her disappearance would cause no scandal, but connected enough to the old aristocracy that my acceptance of her presence implies cooperation. That is why the king sent me, not why you accepted. I accepted because refusal would have triggered open conflict with the crown. I am not ready for that war yet." "Yet. Empires fall slowly, Lady Seraphina, then all at once." She moved closer. Not close enough to touch, but near enough that he would have to acknowledge her presence as something more than background noise. "You speak about power like it is the only thing that exists," she said, "as if the world is just a map to conquer." "Because it is. And what happens when you have conquered everything? When there is nothing left to take?" Cedric's expression did not change, but something flickered behind those gray eyes. Something that might have been recognition. "That question suggests you believe I have something other than conquest to live for. Do you?" Silence stretched between them. Then Cedric turned and walked toward the doorway without answering. "You will return to your chambers now," he said, "and you will remain there until I decide otherwise. And if I refuse—" He stopped, looked back. "Then I will have guards carry you there, and you will discover that Blackmore Keep has rooms far less comfortable than the one currently assigned to you." Seraphina held his gaze. "You cannot keep me locked away forever. Watch me." He left. Seraphina stood alone in the library and felt the weight of stone walls pressing down from every direction. 3 weeks passed. The northern winter deepened into the kind of cold that made soldiers question whether survival was worth the effort. Snow piled against the castle walls in drifts tall enough to bury horses. Storms rolled across the cliffs with mechanical regularity, each one more vicious than the last. Inside Blackmoor Keep, life continued with the precise brutality of a machine designed to crush anything soft. Caedric ruled from his war chamber in the council hall. He signed execution orders before breakfast, reviewed tax records during midday meals, spent evenings reading military reports, while fires burned low in hearths that never quite warmed the stone. He did not think about Seraphina, except when he did, which was every night. She haunted him without being present. Her voice, her defiance, the way she looked at him like he was human instead of the monster everyone else pretended not to see. He hated it. On the 23rd day, Garrick entered Caedric's private study with the expression of a man delivering news he knew would not be well received. "Lady Seraphina has left her chambers again, Your Grace." Caedric did not look up from the correspondence he was reviewing, then escort her back. "We tried. She refused. So carry her." "She locked herself in the chapel." Caedric's pen stopped moving. "The chapel?" "Yes, Your Grace." "With the servants?" "And several guards who appear to be listening to her speak about the conditions in the lower quarters." Caedric set the pen down with deliberate care. "What is she saying?" Garrick shifted his weight. "She is discussing the rationing of food, the lack of heating in the servant wings, the punishment protocols for minor infractions. She is inciting dissent." "She is asking questions, my lord. Questions are how rebellions begin, Commander." "No." Caedric stood and moved toward the door. Garrick followed. They descended through the castle in silence, passing tapestries and torches and guards, who snapped to attention without making eye contact. The chapel occupied a small corner of the main keep, a room barely large enough for 30 people, with narrow windows and wooden pews worn smooth by generations of frightened prayers. Caedric's ancestors had built it as a formality, because kingdoms expected nobles to fear God even when they feared nothing else. He stepped through the doorway. Seraphina stood near the altar with a dozen servants gathered around her. 2 guards flanked the entrance, their expressions caught between duty and uncertainty. She looked up when Caedric entered, did not stop speaking. "The Duke's laws state that servants are entitled to 2 meals per day and adequate shelter. Yet many of you sleep in rooms without heat and receive food rations that barely sustain a child." "Lady Seraphina," Caedric said quietly. She turned to face him. "Your Grace, how kind of you to join us." The servants scattered like birds before a storm. Within seconds, only Seraphina remained standing near the altar with the guards positioned carefully behind Caedric. He walked forward slowly. "You were confined to your chambers." "I was, and I left." "That was not a suggestion. Neither is starvation." Caedric stopped 3 feet away from her, close enough to reach out, close enough that she should have been afraid. "You are testing me," he said. "I'm showing you what you refuse to see." "I see everything inside these walls." "No. You see what serves your power. The rest is invisible to you." The anger building inside Caedric's chest felt different than usual, hotter, more personal. "You know nothing about power," he said. "I know it makes men blind. And what do you see? Lady Seraphina, from your moral high ground?" Shamanen." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell lavender and snow in her hair. "I see a man so afraid of weakness that he has forgotten how to be anything else." The words landed like a blade between his ribs. Caedric's hand shot out before thought caught up with instinct. He gripped her wrist hard enough to bruise, pulled her against him with enough force that she gasped. "Afraid," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than any shout. "You think I am afraid." Seraphina did not try to pull away. "Yes." "Of what?" "That someone might see who you were before you became this." Caedric's grip tightened. Her pulse hammered against his palm. Those green eyes stared up at him without flinching, and he realized with sudden clarity that she was not performing courage. She actually was not afraid of him. That should have felt like power. Instead, it felt like something far more dangerous. He released her wrist and stepped back. "Return to your chambers," he said. "Now." "And if I refuse again?" Then I will make good on my threat to find you accommodations in the dungeons." Seraphina rubbed her wrist where red marks were already forming, but her expression never changed. "Do what you must, Your Grace. We both know you stopped being capable of mercy a long time ago." She walked past him toward the door, paused at the threshold. "But someday you will run out of people to intimidate, and you will discover that loneliness is the only kingdom fear can build." Then she was gone. Kydrick stood in the empty chapel and felt the walls closing in. What? The execution was scheduled for dawn. Kydrick stood on the battlements and watched the scaffold being assembled in the courtyard below. Wood hammered together in the darkness, torches flickering against stone. Guards moving with the efficiency of men who had done this too many times to feel anything about it anymore. The condemned was a soldier named Marcus, caught stealing bread from the kitchen stores. 3 loaves, enough to feed his family for a week. The law was clear. Theft meant death. No exceptions. Kydrick had signed the order without hesitation. Now, standing in the cold before sunrise, he felt Seraphina's words circling through his skull like vultures. "Someday you will run out of people to intimidate." Below, Marcus was dragged into the courtyard with his hands bound. His wife and children stood near the gates, weeping. The executioner tested the rope. Kydrick's hands gripped the stone merlon hard enough that his knuckles went white. This was justice. Order. The machinery of power that kept kingdoms from collapsing into chaos. This was necessary. Footsteps echoed behind him. He did not need to turn to know who stood there. "Stop it," Seraphina said. "No." He stole bread to feed his children. He stole the reason does not matter. The reason is the only thing that matters. Kydrick finally turned. She stood 5 feet away, wrapped in a cloak against the cold, her hair whipping in the wind. "You want me to show mercy," he said. "I want you to remember you are human. Mercy is weakness, and weakness gets people killed." "No," her voice rose. "Fear gets people killed. Control gets people killed. The machine you built gets people killed, and someday it will devour you too." Below, the executioner placed the noose around Marcus's neck. Kydrick's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. "Leave, Lady Seraphina. Stop the execution. Leave. Please." The word cracked something inside him. Not mercy, not compassion, just the sudden, terrible recognition that she was begging him to choose something other than the path he had walked for 13 years without deviation. And he wanted to. God help him, he wanted to. But mercy was the first step towards softness, and softness was how dukes ended up dead. "No," he said. Below, the executioner pulled the lever. Seraphina turned and ran. Kydrick remained on the battlements and watched the sun rise over a kingdom built on bones. She stopped coming to meals, stopped requesting access to the library, stopped leaving her chambers at all. Garrick reported that food trays returned untouched, that the maids heard her weeping behind locked doors, that servants whispered she had given up. Kydrick told himself he did not care, told himself she would adjust, that they all adjusted eventually. But at night, alone in his chambers with storms tearing across the cliffs, he stood at the window and wondered if this was what victory felt like. Empty, hollow, poisoned. On the 37th day, a messenger arrived from the capital with sealed orders from King Aldrich. Kydrick opened the letter in his war chamber with Garrick standing nearby. The words were simple. Lord Lucien Morcant had been appointed as the king's new advisor. His first recommendation: remove Duke Kydrick Raventhorn from power before Blackmoor became too dangerous to control. War was coming, not someday. Now. Kydrick set the letter down and felt the machine inside him start calculating. Alliances, troop movements, supply lines, who could be trusted, who needed to die. But beneath the strategy, something else stirred. A question he had not allowed himself to ask in over a decade. What if she was right? What if the kingdom he had built was just a prettier name for a prison? He stood and walked toward the door. "Where are you going, Your Grace?" Garrick asked. Kydrick did not answer. He climbed the eastern tower stairs with his heartbeat hammering against his ribs, reached Seraphina's door, knocked once, no response. He opened it anyway. She sat at the window with her back to him, silhouetted against gray light. She did not turn when he entered. "I came to tell you something," Kadric said. Silence. "War is coming. Morkant has convinced the king that Blackmoor is a threat. Within weeks, royal armies will march north." Still nothing. "I wanted you to know that when the fighting begins, I will send you somewhere safe. You will not be harmed." Finally she spoke. "Do you know what the cruelest thing about you is, Duke Raventhorn?" He waited. "You believe your brutality makes you strong, but all it does is ensure you will die alone." The words hit harder than any weapon. Kadric crossed the room and stood behind her chair, close enough to touch, close enough that he could see her reflection in the window glass. "I am trying to protect you," he said. "No, you are trying to control me. There is a difference." "Seraphina, do not say my name like we are anything other than enemies." Her voice broke on the last word. Kadric's hand moved without permission. He touched her shoulder, felt her flinch beneath his palm, and realized with sudden, devastating clarity that he had become exactly what she said, a monster in a castle full of ghosts. He withdrew his hand, stepped back. "I will leave you alone," he said quietly. "That is all you know how to do." He walked toward the door, stopped at the threshold. "For what it is worth, Lady Seraphina, you were right about me." Then he left before she could respond. Sad. The message arrived 3 nights later. Morkant's assassins had infiltrated the castle. Kadric was reading reports when the first scream tore through the corridor outside his chambers. He moved with the speed of someone who had been waiting for violence his entire life. Dagger in hand. Door slammed open. A guard lay dead in the hallway with his throat cut. More shouts echoed from below. Kadric ran. He reached the eastern tower as guards clashed with men in dark cloaks. Steel rang against steel. Blood sprayed across stone. Bodies fell. And standing in the center of the chaos, with a blade pressed against her throat, was Seraphina. The assassin holding her smiled. "Duke Raventhorn, how kind of you to join us." Kadric stopped 10 feet away. Kadric. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring wound too tight. "Let her go." "I think not. Lord Morkant sends his regards. He wishes to inform you that your time ruling the North has ended. Morkant is a coward hiding behind hired blades. Perhaps. But he is a coward who is about to watch the great Duke of Blackmoor bleed out on his own floors." More assassins emerged from the shadows. 5, 6, too many. Kadric's mind calculated angles and outcomes with brutal efficiency. He could kill 3 before they reached him, maybe 4 if he was fast enough, but not all of them, and Seraphina would die. The assassin's grip tightened on her throat. A thin line of blood appeared where the blade pressed against skin. "Choose, Your Grace. Surrender and die quickly, or fight and watch her suffer first." Kadric looked at Seraphina. Her eyes met his, and she mouthed 2 words. "Fight back." Something inside Kadric's chest shattered. He smiled. "You made a mistake coming here." "Did I?" "Yes." Kadric's voice dropped to the cold whisper that preceded death. "You assumed I needed her alive to destroy you." The assassin's expression flickered with doubt. Kadric moved. The world exploded into violence and blood and the sound of men dying badly. He fought like something carved from darkness itself, his blade finding throats and hearts with surgical precision. Garrick and the guards crashed into the battle from behind. The assassin holding Seraphina hesitated for 1 critical second. She drove her elbow into his ribs, twisted free, and grabbed the fallen guard's sword from the floor. By the time Kadric reached her, she was standing over the assassin's corpse, with blood on her hands and fury in her eyes. They stared at each other across a hallway painted red. "You came," she whispered. Kadric stepped closer, closer, until no space remained between them. "I will always come for you," he said, and then he kissed her like a man who had just discovered he had something worth losing. The kiss tasted like blood and desperation. Kadric's hand tangled in Seraphina's hair while his other arm locked around her waist hard enough to bruise. She kissed him back with the same violence he offered, her fingers digging into his shoulders like she was trying to hold on to something that might disappear if she let go. Around them, the hallway still dripped with fresh corpses, Guards moved through the carnage, checking bodies, securing doors. Garrick barked orders somewhere distant, but all of it existed in another world, one that no longer mattered. Kedrick pulled back just enough to speak against her mouth, not enough to let her escape. "You should not have come for me," Serafina whispered. "I had no choice. Everyone has a choice. Not about this." Her eyes searched his face like she was trying to find something human beneath the monster everyone else saw. Her thumb traced the line of his jaw, still trembling from adrenaline. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we survive." He released her and stepped back before his control shattered completely. The distance between them felt like a physical wound, but proximity was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with assassins. Garrick appeared at the end of the corridor with blood on his armor and exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "Your Grace, we have secured the eastern wing. 6 assassins dead. 2 escaped through the servants' passages. How many of ours?" 3 guards. 1 cook who tried to stop them. Kedrick's jaw clenched. "Find the 2 who escaped. I want them alive." "My lord, they are already beyond the walls." "Then send riders. Offer gold. Threaten their families." "I do not care how you accomplish it, Commander. Bring them back breathing so I can learn exactly how many more are coming." Garrick hesitated, his gaze flicking toward Serafina for just a moment before returning to Kedrick. "And Lady Serafina?" "She stays with me." "Your Grace, her chambers would be safer." "She stays with me." The words left no room for argument. Garrick bowed slightly and retreated down the corridor. The remaining guards followed, dragging bodies toward the courtyard where fires would consume the evidence by morning. Serafina watched them go. "You cannot protect me forever," she said. "Watch me try." "That is not protection. That is possession." Kedrick turned to face her directly. The space between them crackled with something dangerous and inevitable. "Do you know what Morkant will do if his assassins return empty-handed?" he asked quietly. "He will send more, better trained, more ruthless, and next time they will not try to negotiate. They will simply cut your throat while you sleep and leave your body where I will find it. So you lock me away instead. I keep you alive, by making me a prisoner, by making you mine." The words hung in the air like a blade. Serafina stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. "And what if I do not want to be yours?" she said. "What if I would rather die free than live in a cage?" Kedrick's hand shot out before thought caught up with instinct. He gripped her chin, tilted her head back until those green eyes met his without escape. "Then you are more foolish than I thought, or braver than you will ever be." His thumb traced the cut on her throat where the assassin's blade had drawn blood. The wound was shallow but angry, a thin red line that made something primal and violent surge through his chest. "Brave people die young, Lady Serafina. So do tyrants. Then we will die together." He released her and walked toward his chambers without looking back, heard her footsteps following, felt the weight of her gaze like a brand between his shoulder blades. When they reached his private rooms, he locked the door behind them and leaned against the heavy oak, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the fight. Serafina stood in the center of the chamber and looked around with the careful assessment of someone mapping escape routes. "This is where you sleep," she said. "This is where I pretend to sleep." The room was sparse. A massive bed with dark blankets, a desk buried under military reports, weapons mounted on the walls. No decorations, no comfort, just the essentials required for a man who had stopped believing in anything soft. Serafina moved toward the desk and picked up one of the reports. "Morkant has been planning this for months," she said, scanning this page. "These supply routes, the troop movements near the southern border. He wants Blackmore isolated before he strikes." "I know." "And you did nothing to stop it?" "I was waiting to see how far he would go." She set the report down and turned to face him with something like fury burning behind her eyes. "You used me as bait." Kedrick pushed away from the door and crossed the room until he stood close enough to see the pulse hammering in her throat. "I used everyone as bait," he said. "That is how war works. That is how monsters work." "Yes." The word came out flat and cold and true. Serafina's hand moved so fast he almost did not catch it. Her palm cracked across his face, hard enough to snap his head sideways. The sting spread through his cheek like fire. When he looked back at her, she was breathing hard, her chest heaving, tears tracking down her face. "I hate you," she whispered. "I know. I hate that you made me care about you. I know that too. Then why? Because you are the only person in this entire kingdom who looks at me and sees something other than a weapon. Her expression crumbled. Kedrick reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat. She did not move. His hand cupped her face with a gentleness that felt foreign and terrifying. I will destroy Morkant, he said quietly. I will burn the capital to ash if that is what it takes to keep you breathing. But I need you to understand something. What? I am not a good man. I never was. And I never will be. I know. And you stayed anyway. Yes. Why? Seraphina's hand covered his where it rested against her cheek. Because someone has to see you, she said, even if you cannot see yourself anymore. The kiss this time was different, slower, deeper, like drowning and being saved at the same time. Morning arrived with fresh snow and fresh bodies. The two escaped assassins had been found hanging from trees 3 miles outside the castle walls, their throats cut, a message carved into the bark above their corpses. Morkant sends his regards. Kedrick stood in the courtyard and stared at the bodies laid out on the stone. Garrick stood beside him, silent. He knew we would catch them, Kedrick said. Yes, my lord. He wanted us to find them like this, yes. To prove he can reach inside Blackmoor whenever he chooses. The commander said nothing. Kedrick turned away from the corpses and walked back toward the keep. Inside, the castle moved with the efficient brutality of a machine preparing for war. Servants packed supplies. Blacksmiths sharpened weapons. Soldiers drilled in the training yards despite the snow. Seraphina found him in the war chamber 3 hours later. She entered without knocking, her presence filling the space like a storm rolling across the cliffs. You need to evacuate the castle, she said. No, Kedrick, Morkant is coming. Let him come. You cannot fight the entire royal army. Watch me. She slammed her hands on the table hard enough to rattle the maps. This is not about honor. This is suicide. He looked up at her with eyes that had gone cold and flat. If Morkant wants Blackmoor, he will have to take it from my corpse. And what about everyone else who dies with you? The guards? The servants? Me? The question landed like a physical blow. Kedrick stood slowly and moved around the table until he faced her across a distance that felt impossible to cross. I have spent 13 years building this kingdom into something that cannot be destroyed, he said. Every decision I made, every execution I ordered, every alliance I forged was designed to ensure Blackmoor would survive anything. And now you want me to abandon it because Morkant sent a dozen hired killers? I want you to survive. Why? Because She stopped. The words hung unfinished in the air between them. Kedrick stepped closer. Say it. No, say it, Seraphina. Her hands fisted at her sides. I cannot. Why not? Because if I say it, she whispered, then I admit that I have lost, that you have won, that everything I believed about staying untouchable was just a lie I told myself to feel safe. Kedrick's hand moved to her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. You were never safe, he said quietly. Not from the moment you walked into this castle. I know. And you stayed anyway. Yes, then say it. Seraphina's eyes met his, green and gold and drowning. I love you, she said. I love you and I hate myself for it, and I would still choose you over anything else in this broken kingdom. The words shattered something inside Kedrick's chest that he had not known was still intact. He kissed her like a man trying to memorize the shape of salvation before it disappeared. When they finally pulled apart, Seraphina's voice came out rough and wrecked. Now what? Now we fight. The council convened that night with the energy of men discussing their own funerals. Lord Kane sat with his ledgers closed for the first time in years. Ashford looked pale and drawn. Garrick stood near the doorway with his hand resting on his sword hilt. Kedrick entered last with Seraphina beside him. The room went silent. Lady Seraphina will be attending council meetings from this point forward, Kedrick said, taking his seat at the head of the table. Anyone who objects may leave now. No one moved. Good. Commander Garrick, report. Garrick stepped forward. Scouts confirmed that Morkant is mobilizing forces from 3 southern provinces. Approximately 8,000 soldiers, including cavalry and siege equipment. They will reach Blackmoor within 2 weeks if they march through the mountain passes. Can we hold? The commander hesitated, Not indefinitely, Your Grace. We have 1,500 men. The walls are strong, but they were not designed to withstand a sustained siege from an army 5 times our size. Kane cleared his throat. If I may, Your Grace, there are other options. Speak. We could negotiate. Offer Morcant something he wants in exchange for peace. Kedrick's expression did not change. And what does Morcant want? Lord Kane? Your head on a pike. Silence filled the chamber. Then negotiation seems unlikely. Ashford leaned forward. What if we sent Lady Seraphina back to the capital? Morcant wants leverage against you. Without her... The dagger embedded itself in the table 3 inches from Ashford's hand before he could finish the sentence. Ashford went white. Kedrick's voice dropped to a whisper that carried more threat than any shout. Finish that thought, Lord Ashford, and I will personally ensure you join the assassins in the courtyard. Ashford swallowed hard and said nothing. Seraphina spoke for the first time. What if we do not wait for Morcant to come to us? Every eye in the room turned toward her. Explain, Kedrick said. Seraphina stood and moved to the map spread across the table. Her finger traced a route through the mountains. Morcant is moving 8,000 soldiers through narrow passes in winter. That makes him slow, vulnerable. If we strike first with a small force, we could collapse the passes behind his vanguard and trap the main army on the other side. You want to start an avalanche, Garrick said slowly. I want to use the terrain against him. The North has survived for generations because we understand this land better than anyone else. Morcant is marching his army into a graveyard. We just need to spring the trap. Kedrick studied the map in silence. The plan was dangerous, reckless. It required perfect timing and absolute precision. It was exactly the kind of strategy that could win wars or destroy everything. He looked up at Seraphina. This was your idea? Yes. If it fails, we lose our best soldiers, and the castle falls within days. I know. And you still think we should try? Her gaze held his without flinching. I think we are already dead if we do nothing. Kedrick felt something shift inside his chest. Not fear, not doubt. Recognition. She understood war the same way he did. Not as honor or glory, but as survival at any cost. Garrick, he said, how many men would we need? 200, maybe less if we move fast. Can it be done? The commander studied the map for a long moment. Yes, my lord, but the risks are acceptable. Prepare the men. We leave before dawn. The council erupted into objections. Too dangerous, too reckless, too likely to fail. Kedrick stood and the room fell silent. Morcant believes he can march an army to my doorstep and take what belongs to me. He believes fear makes me weak. He believes I will surrender rather than watch Blackmore burn. He walked to the window overlooking the cliffs. He is wrong, and he will learn that lesson in blood. Dismissed. The council scattered. Garrick remained behind with Seraphina and Kedrick. Your Grace, the commander said quietly. If this fails, it will not. But if it does, then we die fighting instead of waiting. I can live with that outcome. Garrick nodded slowly and left. Seraphina moved to stand beside Kedrick at the window. Outside, snow fell across the fortress in sheets of white that buried everything. You are really going to do this, she said. Yes. You could die. Everyone dies, Seraphina. The only question is whether it means something. She was quiet for a long moment. When you come back, if I come back, when you come back, I want you to promise me something. He turned to face her. What? That you will stop pretending you are only capable of violence. He almost smiled. That is all I have ever been good at. No. That is just what you chose to become because it was easier than being hurt again. Her hand found his. But you were hurt anyway, Kedrick. By your father. By the kingdom. By every person who looked at you and saw a weapon instead of a human being. And I am so sorry that happened to you. His throat tightened. Do not apologize for things that are not your fault. Then let me apologize for the things that are. For judging you without understanding. For pushing you when you needed patience. For believing I could fix you when you were never broken in the first place. Seraphina, you are not a monster. You are just someone who learned to survive in a world that wanted you dead. The words broke something inside him that had been holding together through sheer force of will. Kedrick pulled her against him and held on like she was the only thing keeping him from drowning. I do not know how to be anything else, he whispered against her hair. Then let me teach you. Oh. They left in darkness with 200 soldiers and enough supplies to last 3 days. The mountain passes cut through rock and ice like scars across the landscape. Wind tore at them from every direction. Horses stumbled on frozen trails barely wide enough for single file. Cedric rode at the front with Garrick beside him. Behind them, soldiers moved in grim silence, their breath misting in the freezing air. Seraphina had wanted to come. He had refused. They had fought about it for an hour before he physically locked her in his chambers and posted guards outside the door. She had called him a tyrant. He had called her reckless. Neither of them had been wrong. Now, miles from Blackmoor with enemy territory stretching before them, Cedric wondered if he had made a mistake leaving her behind. Not because she could not handle herself, because being away from her felt like missing a limb. Your Grace, Garrick said quietly, the scouts report Morcant's vanguard is 3 miles ahead. Approximately 1,500 men camped in the valley below the northern pass. Cedric studied the terrain ahead. The pass narrowed into a bottleneck with steep cliffs on both sides. Perfect killing ground if the avalanche worked. Fatal trap if it did not. Position the men along the ridge, he said. Wait for my signal. And if the signal does not come, then retreat to Blackmoor and prepare for siege. Garrick nodded and rode back to relay orders. Cedric continued forward alone until he reached the overlook above the enemy camp. Below, fires burned in neat rows. Soldiers moved through the darkness. Supply wagons clustered near the center. Too organized. Too confident. Morcant did not expect resistance this far from Blackmoor. Mistake. Cedric dismounted and moved to where his men had positioned barrels of black powder along the cliff face. The charges were crude but effective. One spark, and half the mountainside would come down on top of Morcant's soldiers. A young soldier named Thomas approached nervously. Your Grace, everything is ready. Good. When I give the order, light the fuses and run. Do not wait to see if it works, just run. Yes, my lord. Cedric gripped the boy's shoulder. You're about to kill a lot of men tonight, Thomas. Some of them will have families. Some of them will be good people fighting for what they believe is right. Do you understand that? The soldier swallowed hard. Yes, Your Grace. Good. Do it anyway. He released him and moved back to the overlook. Waited. Watched. Below, the camp settled into the stillness that came before dawn. Guards changed shifts. Fires burned low. Cedric raised his hand, held it, dropped it. The world exploded into light and thunder. Charges detonated along the cliff face in rapid succession. Rock shattered. Snow cascaded downward in massive waves. The entire mountainside shifted and roared like something alive and furious. Cedric watched the avalanche swallow Morcant's camp whole. Screams rose from the valley and were buried beneath tons of ice and stone. Fires vanished. Wagons disappeared. Hundreds of soldiers simply ceased to exist between one heartbeat and the next. When the rumbling finally stopped, silence returned. Heavy. Suffocating. Final. Garrick appeared beside him. It worked, the commander said quietly. Cedric stared at the destruction below. Send riders back to Blackmoor. Tell them Morcant's vanguard is destroyed, but the main force will regroup within days. We need to be ready. Yes, Your Grace. The ride back took 6 hours. When Cedric finally reached Blackmoor, exhaustion had seeped into his bones. He dismounted in the courtyard and headed straight for his chambers without speaking to anyone. Found Seraphina standing at the window. She turned when he entered, did not say anything, just crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him while he stood there covered in ash and blood that was not his own. You came back, she whispered. I promised I would. How many? Enough. She pulled back just far enough to see his face. Are you all right? No. The truth surprised them both. Cedric sank into the chair beside the hearth and buried his face in his hands. The weight of what he had done pressed down like the mountain itself. I just killed 1,500 men, he said quietly. Most of them probably had no idea why they were marching north. They were following orders, feeding their families. And I buried them alive because it was strategically advantageous. Seraphina knelt in front of him. Her hands covered his. You did what you had to do to survive. That does not make it right. No, but it makes it necessary. He looked at her through the space between his fingers. How do you live with that? Knowing the things I am capable of? Seraphina's expression softened. Because I know the things you are capable of that have nothing to do with violence. The way you memorized every servant's name after I asked you to see them as people. The way you changed the rationing system when I showed you how many were going hungry. The way you hold me like I am something precious instead of another piece on your chessboard. I do not deserve you. No, but you are trying to. And that is more than most men in your position would do. She pulled him down to the floor beside her, and they sat with their backs against the bed, while firelight danced across stone walls. Morcant will come for us now, Cadric said, with everything he has. I know. We might not survive. I know that too. And you are still here. Where else would I be? He looked at her sideways. Anywhere safe. Anywhere far from me. Serafina smiled without humor. Safe is a lie people tell themselves to feel better about dying slowly. I would rather burn fast beside you than fade away alone somewhere else. Cadric's hand found hers in the darkness. When this is over, if we survive, when we survive, he corrected, I want to show you something. What? The north in summer. When the ice melts and wildflowers cover the cliffs. When the sea turns blue instead of gray and you can stand on the battlements without freezing. Serafina squeezed his hand. I would like that. They sat in silence while the fire burned low and dawn crept closer. Teak. Morcant arrived 7 days later with 7,000 soldiers and the king's banner flying above his head. The army spread across the frozen fields below Blackmoor like a disease. Siege equipment rolled into position. Archers lined the ridges, cavalry formed ranks that stretched to the horizon. Cedric stood on the battlements and watched the kingdom prepare to destroy him. Beside him, Garrick spoke quietly. We have enough supplies for 3 weeks if we ration carefully. After that, we starve or surrender. Yes, my lord. Then we make sure the siege does not last 3 weeks. How? By doing something Morcant will not expect. What is that, your grace? Cedric smiled without warmth. We invite him inside. The message went out under a white flag at midday. Duke Cadric Raventhorn requests a parley with Lord Lucian Morcant to discuss terms of surrender. The response came within hours. Tomorrow, at dawn, alone, unarmed. Cadric read the message in his war chamber while Serafina paced like a caged animal. This is a trap, she said. Of course it is. Then why are you agreeing to it? Because I am setting one of my own. She stopped pacing and turned to face him. Explain. Cedric stood and moved to the map of Blackmoor's surrounding terrain. Morcant wants me dead, but he wants me humiliated first. He wants the entire kingdom to watch me kneel before him and beg for mercy that he will never grant. So he will agree to the parley because his pride demands it. And then I kill him before he kills me. Serafina's expression hardened. That is not a plan. That is suicide. It is the only option we have left. No, I will not let you... You do not get to decide what I do, Serafina. The words came out harsher than he intended. Her eyes flashed. Then I will go with you. Absolutely not. You do not get to protect me by dying in my place. I am not dying for you. I am killing for you. There is a difference. Not from where I am standing. Cedric crossed the room until he stood close enough to see the fury and fear warring behind her eyes. If I do not come back, he said quietly, Garrick will take you through the northern passages to the coast. There's a ship waiting. It will take you somewhere Morcant cannot reach. I am not leaving you. Yes, you are. Cadric, promise me. Her hands fisted at her sides. I hate you for this. Promise me anyway. Tears tracked down her face. I promise, she whispered. He kissed her forehead. Then everything I have done will have been worth it. Dawn arrived cold and merciless. Cedric rode out alone toward the neutral ground, halfway between Blackmoor's gates and Morcant's army. No armor, no weapons visible. Just dark clothes and the certainty that he was riding toward death or glory, and there was no middle ground left. Morcant waited with 50 soldiers surrounding him. Coward. The advisor dismounted as Cedric approached. He was younger than Cedric expected, maybe 35. With the kind of polished arrogance that came from a lifetime of winning through manipulation instead of strength. Duke Raventhorn, Morcant said with a smile that never reached his eyes. How kind of you to accept my invitation. Cedric dismounted and stopped 10 feet away. You asked for surrender. Here I am. Morkant circled slowly like a predator evaluating prey. I expected more resistance. The great Duke of Blackmoor, reduced to begging for his life. I am not begging for my life. No, no. I am giving you one chance to retreat before I destroy everything you have built. Morkant laughed. You are surrounded by my army. Your fortress is about to fall. Your people are starving. And you believe you have leverage? I do not need leverage, Caedric said quietly. I just need you dead. The dagger appeared in his hand faster than thought. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and drove the blade toward Morkant's throat. Soldiers surged forward. Steel rang against steel. And then everything exploded into chaos as Blackmoor's hidden archers opened fire from the ridge above and cavalry charged from concealed positions behind the hills. Morkant's eyes went wide with shock and rage. You never stood a chance, Caedric finished. The blade found its mark. Morkant fell choking on his own blood while the battle erupted around them. Caedric did not wait to watch him die. He mounted his horse and rode back toward Blackmoor, while arrows darkened the sky and men screamed and died on frozen ground. By the time he reached the gates, Garrick was already leading the counterattack. Morkant's army fractured without leadership. Soldiers scattered. Officers shouted conflicting orders. The siege broke before noon. By sunset, Morkant's remaining forces had retreated south in disarray, and Caedric stood in his war chamber staring at the map of a kingdom that had just learned exactly why Blackmoor was still standing after 6 generations of people trying to tear it down. Seraphina found him there hours later. She did not say anything, just walked into his arms and held on while he finally allowed himself to breathe. It is over, she whispered. Caedric's grip tightened. No, he said quietly. It is just beginning. Because Morkant was dead. But the king would never forgive this. War was no longer coming. It was already here. And there would be no turning back from what came next. The king's response arrived 3 days after Morkant's death. Not a letter. Not a declaration of war. Just silence so loud it made the stones of Blackmoor Keep feel heavier. Caedric stood in the war chamber and stared at the empty parchment laid across the table. Garrick had brought it personally, his face gray with the kind of dread that came from understanding what unsaid things meant. No threats, the commander said quietly. No demands. Nothing. Caedric's fingers traced the royal seal broken at the bottom of the blank page. This is worse than threats. Yes, my lord, because silence meant the king had moved beyond negotiation, beyond posturing. He had entered the territory where actions replaced words and mercy became a weakness neither side could afford. Seraphina entered the chamber without knocking. She had stopped asking permission weeks ago, and Caedric had stopped pretending to care about protocol when it came to her. What does it say? She asked. Nothing. She moved closer and looked at the empty parchment. That is not nothing. That is a promise. Caedric's jaw tightened. I know. Outside the narrow windows, snow continued to fall across the northern territories, like the kingdom itself was trying to bury them before the king's armies arrived. Scouts reported movement along the southern borders. Entire provinces mobilizing. Noble houses pledging loyalty to the crown with the kind of enthusiasm that came from watching what happened to people who stood against King Aldric. Blackmoor was alone. Completely. Utterly. Fatally alone. How long do we have? Seraphina asked. Garrick cleared his throat. 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if the weather holds and slows their march. And then? Then we face the largest army Valadorn has assembled in 2 generations. Caedric turned away from the table and walked toward the hearth, where flames struggled against the draft. He could feel their eyes on his back, waiting, hoping he had some strategy that would save them all. He did not. For the first time in 13 years, Duke Caedric Raventhorn had no plan beyond survival, and survival was looking less likely with every passing hour. Send word to every commander in the north, he said finally. Call in every debt, every favor, every man who owes House Raventhorn loyalty or coin or blood. Garrick shifted his weight. Your Grace, most of the northern houses have already bent the knee to the crown. They fear the king more than they respect us. Then they will learn to fear me more. My lord, do it, Commander. Garrick bowed and left. Seraphina waited until the door closed before speaking. You cannot fight the entire kingdom, Caedric. I can try. Trying is not the same as winning. He turned to face her across the space that always felt too wide and too narrow at the same time. What would you have me do, Seraphina? Surrender? Kneel before Aldrich and beg for mercy he will never grant? I would have you survive. By becoming what? A broken duke stripped of his lands and locked in some tower while the kingdom forgets I ever existed? Better alive and forgotten than dead and legendary. The words hit harder than she probably intended. Cadric crossed the room until he stood close enough to see the fear she was trying to hide behind her anger. You think I want to be remembered? He said quietly. You think this is about legacy or pride or some desperate need for glory? Is it not? No. This is about the fact that if I fall, Blackmore falls with me, and everyone inside these walls dies screaming while the king's soldiers burn everything my family built over 6 generations. Then leave. Take the ship waiting at the coast and disappear before the armies arrive. Without you? Her silence was answer enough. Cadric's hand moved to her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a gentleness that felt like surrendering something he could never reclaim. I told you once that I would burn the kingdom before I let anyone take you from me, he said. I meant it. I know. So why do you keep asking me to choose survival over you? Because someone has to, she whispered. And it will not be me. The first defection came 6 days later. Lord Thaddeus Kane, master of coin, disappeared in the night with half the treasury and 3 wagons of supplies meant for the garrison. No warning, no explanation, just gone like smoke, leaving behind empty vaults and soldiers who suddenly realized their pay had vanished along with the man who controlled it. Cadric received the news in his private chambers while dawn bled gray across the frozen sea beyond his windows. He did not rage, did not throw things or issue threats or call for executions. He simply stood there and felt something cold settle into his chest where fury used to live. Garrick hovered near the doorway like a man waiting for an explosion that never came. Your Grace, I can send riders? No, but the treasury is gone. Along with any illusion that loyalty means anything when survival is on the table. Seraphina sat curled in the chair beside the dead hearth, watching him with eyes that saw too much. Kane was always a coward, she said quietly. Cowardice is practical when the alternative is death. Cadric moved to his desk and poured wine with mechanical precision. Drank it without tasting anything. Poured another. How many others? He asked. Garrick hesitated. 3 minor lords have sent messages pledging neutrality. 5 houses in the outer territories have stopped responding to summons. The port cities are refusing to send supplies, so we are bleeding allies faster than we can replace them. Yes, my lord. Cadric set the glass down hard enough that cracks spiderwebbed through the crystal. Send word to Lord Ashford. Tell him I am calling in every debt he owes House Raventhorn. If he refuses, remind him what happened to the last man who stole from me. Your Grace, Ashford commands the eastern garrison. Without him we have nothing. With him we have a chance. Make the choice obvious, Commander. Garrick bowed and retreated. Seraphina uncoiled from the chair and crossed to where Cadric stood gripping the edge of his desk like it was the only thing keeping him upright. You are losing them, she said softly. I know. Not just the lords, the soldiers, the servants, everyone who believed Blackmore was untouchable. I know that too. Then what are you going to do? He looked at her with eyes that had gone empty and cold. Whatever it takes. Akam. Ashford arrived 2 days later with news that made the defections look like mercy. He entered the war chamber flanked by guards who kept their hands too close to their weapons and their eyes too focused on exits. Cadric noticed immediately. Noticed the way Ashford's swagger had been replaced by something tighter, more cautious, more calculated. Your Grace, Ashford said with a bow that felt rehearsed, I received your summons, and yet you brought an armed escort into my war chamber for protection. From whom? Ashford's smile never reached his eyes. These are dangerous times, my lord. One cannot be too careful. Cadric remained seated while Garrick shifted position near the doorway. The tension in the room pulled so tight it could have shattered bone. I called you here to discuss the eastern garrison, Cadric said. I need those soldiers mobilized and ready to march within the week. That may be difficult, Your Grace. Why? Because the eastern garrison no longer answers to House Raventhorn. The words hung in the air like poison. Cadric stood slowly, every movement deliberate, controlled. The thing inside him that wanted to reach across the table and tear Ashford's throat out with his bare hands screamed for release. He ignored it. "Explain." Ashford pulled a sealed letter from his coat and laid it on the table between them. The royal crest marked the wax. King Aldrich has offered amnesty to any northern house that swears loyalty before his armies arrive. In exchange, we keep our lands, our titles, and our lives. The alternative is what happened to Morcant. You mean the alternative is what I did to Morcant? Precisely. Cadric picked up the letter and read it without expression. Every word was exactly what he expected. Pardons for cooperation, execution for resistance. The standard terms offered to men trapped between bad choices and worse ones. He set the letter down. "You are here to tell me you have accepted the king's offer." Ashford's jaw tightened. "I am here to tell you that I am not alone. Half the northern houses have already bent the knee. The rest will follow within days. Blackmore cannot stand against the entire kingdom, Your Grace, and I will not throw away everything I have built to die beside a man who refuses to see reason. The betrayal should have felt like rage. Instead, it just felt inevitable." Cadric moved around the table slowly. Ashford's guards tensed. Hands moved to sword hilts. He stopped 3 feet away. "When my father ruled Blackmore, he believed loyalty could be purchased through fear alone. He burned villages, executed families, made examples of anyone who questioned his authority. And do you know what that earned him? What, Your Grace? A knife in the dark, and a son who hated him enough to watch him bleed out on the floor of this very chamber." Ashford's face went pale. "I am not your father, my lord. No, you are worse, because he was honest about being a monster. You hide behind strategy and self-preservation while selling out the people who trusted you. I am surviving. You are kneeling. Better on my knees than buried in the ground." Cadric smiled without warmth. "Get out of my castle, Lord Ashford. Take your guards and your cowardice and return to the eastern garrison you just sold to the crown. But know this." Ashford swallowed hard. "What? When the king's mercy runs out and he comes for you anyway, do not expect me to save you." Ashford left without another word. The door slammed behind him hard enough to rattle the hinges. Garrick moved to stand beside Cadric. "We have lost half our strength," the commander said quietly. "I know. Without the eastern garrison, I know. Your Grace?" "I said I know, Garrick." Silence filled the chamber. Then Seraphina's voice cut through from where she had been standing in the shadows near the window. "There is another option." Both men turned. She stepped into the light with an expression that made Cadric's chest tighten. "No," he said immediately. "You have not heard what I'm going to say. I do not need to. The answer is no." Seraphina moved closer. "The king wants leverage. He wants something that will force you to surrender without a fight. He wants me dead." "No. He wants you broken. And the fastest way to break you is through me." "Absolutely not. Cadric, if I go to the capital, you are not going to the capital. If I go to the capital and offer myself as a hostage, Aldrich will have what he needs to negotiate. Your surrender in exchange for my safety. No more bloodshed. No more war." The rage that had been building inside Cadric's chest finally exploded. His hand slammed on the table hard enough to crack wood. "You want me to trade you to the king like a piece of livestock? You want me to watch you disappear into the capital where I cannot protect you while Aldrich holds you over my head for the rest of my life? I want you to survive. Not like that." "Then how?" "By fighting until there is nothing left to fight for. Even if that means we both die?" "Yes." Seraphina's expression crumbled. "That is not love, Cadric. That is obsession." The words landed like a blade between his ribs. He reached for her, but she stepped back. "Do not," she said. "Do not touch me and pretend that destroying yourself is somehow noble. You are not choosing me by refusing this. You are choosing your pride. My pride is the only thing keeping this castle standing. No. Your pride is the thing that is going to get everyone inside these walls killed." She turned and walked toward the door. Cadric's voice stopped her at the threshold. "If you leave this room, I will have guards posted at your door. You will not be allowed to leave the castle. Do you understand me?" Seraphina looked back with tears streaming down her face. "I understand perfectly. You would rather watch me burn beside you than let me save us both." Then she was gone. Caedric stood in the empty war chamber and felt the foundations of everything he had built crack beneath his feet. Tunk. The assassins came 3 nights later. Not hired blades this time. Royal soldiers wearing the king's colors, moving through the castle with the confidence of men who knew exactly where they were going and what they had been sent to do. Caedric woke to steel scraping against stone outside his chambers. He rolled out of bed with a dagger in his hand before his eyes fully opened, moved to the door, listened. Footsteps. At least 4 men. Coming closer. He glanced toward the adjoining door that connected to Seraphina's room, locked from her side. She had not spoken to him since their argument 3 days ago, and the silence between them felt heavier than the armies gathering at his borders. The door exploded inward. Soldiers poured through with crossbows raised and swords drawn. Caedric moved on instinct, his blade finding the first man's throat before the body hit the ground. The second soldier got off a bolt that missed by inches and embedded in the wall behind where Caedric's head had been. He closed the distance and drove his dagger through the gap in the man's armor below his ribs. The remaining 2 fell back toward the doorway. Caedric did not give them time to regroup. He crashed into them with the kind of violence that came from 13 years of surviving attempts on his life. Steel rang against steel, blood sprayed across stone. Someone screamed. By the time Garrick and the castle guards arrived, 4 bodies lay cooling in pools spreading across the floor. Caedric stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, covered in blood that was not entirely his own. The commander took in the scene with the practiced calm of someone who had seen worse. "Your Grace, are you injured?" Caedric shook his head. "Where's Lady Seraphina?" Garrick's expression went carefully blank. "That is what I came to tell you, my lord." "No, she is gone." The word hit like a physical blow. Caedric moved toward the adjoining door and slammed it open with enough force to tear it off the hinges. Seraphina's chambers were empty, bed made, belongings gone. Nothing left except a single piece of parchment on the desk. He picked it up with hands that shook. The handwriting was hers. "I am sorry, but I will not watch you die for me when there is another way. By the time you read this, I will already be at the capital offering myself to the king in exchange for peace. Do not come after me. Do not try to negotiate. Just survive, Caedric. That is all I ever wanted. I love you, even now, even knowing you will hate me for this." The parchment crumpled in his fist. Caedric turned to Garrick with eyes that had gone dead and cold. "How long ago did she leave?" 6 hours, my lord. She took the northern passage to the coast. There was a ship waiting." "And you let her go?" "She ordered me to stand down. Said if I tried to stop her, you would lose what little support remains in the castle." "So you chose her orders over mine?" "I chose to keep House Raventhorn from tearing itself apart before the king's armies arrive." Caedric's hand tightened around the dagger, still slick with blood. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Caedric dropped the blade and sank into the chair beside the ruined door. "She is gone," he said quietly. "Yes, your grace. And the king has exactly what he wanted." "Yes." Caedric's head fell into his hands. For 13 years, he had ruled Blackmoor through fear and strength and the absolute certainty that control was the only thing separating survival from destruction. He had crushed rebellions, executed traitors, built a kingdom so terrifying that men whispered his name like a curse. And in the end, the woman he loved had walked away because she believed his protection was just another cage. She was right. The realization settled into his chest like a blade. He had spent so long becoming something unbreakable that he had forgotten how to be human, had confused possession with devotion, control with care, and now the only person who saw him as something other than a weapon had sacrificed herself to save him from his own nature. Garrick's voice cut through the silence. "What are your orders, my lord?" Caedric looked up. "Prepare the horses. We ride for the capital within the hour." "Your grace, that is suicide. The king's armies are everywhere. You will never reach Aldrich alive. Then I will die trying. The castle will fall without you." "The castle is already lost, Commander. Seraphina is the only thing that matters now." Garrick hesitated. "And if she does not want to be saved, then I will give her the choice I should have offered from the beginning." "What choice is that?" "To walk away from me completely. No obligations, no debts, just freedom to live whatever life she wants somewhere far from this broken kingdom. That will destroy you." Caedric stood slowly. "I have been destroying myself for 13 years, Garrick. Maybe it is time I tried something different." years. They rode through darkness with 50 soldiers and no supplies beyond what could be carried on horseback. The northern passes were treacherous in winter, narrow trails that wound through mountains where one wrong step meant a fall that would not end until the bodies stopped bouncing off rocks. Wind tore at them from every direction. Snow fell so thick it turned the world into shapeless white nothing. Cedric rode at the front with his mind racing faster than the horses could gallop. Seraphina had been gone for nearly 10 hours now. The ship from the coast would take another day to reach the capital if weather held. That gave him maybe 36 hours to intercept her before she walked into King Aldric's throne room and offered herself as leverage against everything Cedric had spent his life building. 36 hours to undo 13 years of mistakes. Garrick rode up beside him. "Your Grace, the men are exhausted. We need to rest the horses or they will collapse. No stops." "My lord." "I said no stops, Commander. We ride until we reach the capital or until the horses die beneath us. Those are the only two options." Garrick fell silent. They continued through the night and into the next day. Lost 3 horses to broken legs on the mountain trails. Lost 2 soldiers to frostbite so severe they could not hold reins anymore. The remaining men looked half dead, hollow-eyed and shaking, held together by loyalty or fear or the simple momentum of following orders when thinking felt too exhausting. Cedric felt nothing except the singular focus that came from knowing everything depended on the next 24 hours. They reached the outskirts of the capital just before sunset on the second day. The city sprawled across the valley like a wound, all stone and smoke and the dense press of humanity crammed inside walls that had stood for 500 years. Royal banners flew from every tower. Soldiers patrolled the streets in formation. And somewhere inside those walls, Seraphina was walking toward her own execution disguised as negotiation. Cedric dismounted at the edge of the forest overlooking the city. Garrick joined him. "We cannot enter through the main gates," the commander said. "The guard will recognize you immediately. Then we go through the sewers." "Your Grace..." "I am not debating this, Garrick. Find me a way inside the city, or I will walk through the front gates and kill anyone who tries to stop me." The commander studied him for a long moment. "You have changed," he said quietly. "No. I am just finally admitting what I should have seen years ago." "What is that, my lord?" "That power without purpose is just cruelty wearing a crown." They entered the city through a drainage tunnel that emptied into the river district after dark. The sewers were exactly as miserable as expected, narrow passages filled with waste and rats, and the overwhelming stench of a city that dumped everything it did not want into the underground. Cedric did not care. He moved through the darkness with 50 men behind him, all of them trained killers who had followed him into worse situations and survived through luck and brutality in equal measure. They emerged in an alley 3 blocks from the palace district. The streets were quieter than Cedric remembered. Curfew had been imposed. Citizens hurried home with their heads down and their voices low. Soldiers stood at every corner, watching. Garrick pulled Cedric into the shadows of a doorway. "The palace will be heavily guarded. Even if we reach the throne room, Aldrich will have 200 men between us and Seraphina. Then we go through 200 men. That is not a plan. That is mass suicide." Cedric's hand gripped the hilt of his sword. "I am not leaving her in there, Garrick. I do not care how many soldiers I have to kill or how many of us die trying. She chose to sacrifice herself to save me. I am choosing to save her instead. And if she does not want to be saved, then I will kneel before her and beg forgiveness for every time I confused protection with possession. Every time I demanded obedience instead of offering choice. Every time I made her feel like she was mine to control instead of someone I was lucky enough to love." The words felt like pulling shrapnel out of an old wound. Garrick said nothing for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Tell me the plan, Your Grace." But the plan was simple, stupid, desperate, guaranteed to fail. But it was all they had. Cedric and 10 soldiers would enter through the servants' entrance near the kitchens, while Garrick and the remaining men created a diversion at the main gates. Once inside, Cedric would move through the palace toward the throne room where Seraphina was meeting with the king. Everything depended on speed and violence, and the hope that surprise would carry them far enough before the palace guard responded. They moved into position as the city bells rang midnight. Cedric stood in the shadows outside the servants' entrance and felt his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. Not from fear, from the terrible certainty that he was about to either save the only person who mattered or watch her die while he bled out on marble floors. No middle ground left. No retreat. Garrick's voice came low across the darkness. May fortune favor you, your grace. Fortune has never favored me, Commander. But maybe tonight it will favor her. Then Garrick was gone, moving toward the main gates with 40 soldiers who knew they were about to start a fight they could not win. Cedric waited, counted heartbeats, heard the first shouts from the front of the palace as Garrick's men engaged the guard. He moved. The servants' entrance was locked but not guarded. One of his soldiers picked it in seconds. They slipped inside and found themselves in a narrow corridor that smelled like bread and wine and the kitchen fires that never quite went cold. A servant saw them and opened her mouth to scream. Cedric covered the distance in 3 strides and clamped his hand over her mouth. "Where's the throne room?" he said quietly. Her eyes went wide with terror. He gentled his voice. "I am not going to hurt you. I just need to know where they took the woman who arrived today. The one who came to negotiate with the king." The servant's expression shifted from fear to something else. Recognition, maybe? Or pity. She pointed down the corridor toward the east wing. Cedric released her. "Go. Run. Do not look back." She fled. Cedric and his men moved deeper into the palace. They passed tapestries worth more than most villages, marble columns imported from quarries 1,000 miles away, gold fixtures that existed purely to remind people how much wealth the crown controlled, all of it meaningless compared to finding her alive. They reached the throne room as shouts echoed through the palace. Garrick's diversion had bought them maybe 5 minutes before the full guard descended. Not enough time. Never enough time. Cedric kicked open the throne room doors. Inside, King Aldrich sat on a throne carved from black stone that looked like it was drinking the light out of the air. Royal guards lined the walls. Advisors clustered near the dais, and kneeling in the center of the room with chains around her wrists was Seraphina. She looked up when Cedric entered. Their eyes met across the distance, hers filled with tears. "No," she whispered. Cedric crossed the throne room floor with his sword drawn and murder in his eyes. Aldrich rose from his throne slowly. "Duke Raventhorn, how unexpected. Release her." "Or what? You will fight your way through my entire palace? Kill me in my own throne room?" "Yes." The king laughed. "You are either incredibly brave or catastrophically stupid. I am done caring which." Cedric reached Seraphina and cut the chains with one strike. She stumbled to her feet. He caught her before she fell. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Cedric, you should not have come." "Are you hurt?" "No." "Good." He turned to face the king with Seraphina behind him. Aldrich's smile faded. "You cannot win this, Raventhorn. My guards will cut you down before you reach the door." "Probably." "Then why come at all?" Cedric's grip tightened on his sword. "Because 13 years ago I killed my father to stop him from becoming the kind of monster who sacrificed everything for power. And I spent every day since then becoming exactly what I destroyed. But she..." He glanced back at Seraphina. "She saw what I could not. That survival without humanity is just another kind of death." Aldrich's expression hardened. "How touching." "Guards, kill them both." The soldiers moved forward. Cedric raised his sword, and Seraphina's voice cut through the throne room like a blade. "Wait." Everyone stopped. She stepped forward until she stood beside Cedric instead of behind him. "Your Majesty," she said clearly, "I came here to offer myself as a hostage in exchange for peace. That offer still stands, but with one condition." "What condition?" "That Duke Raventhorn lives, stripped of his title if you must, exiled from the north. Whatever punishment satisfies your need for justice, but alive." Aldrich studied her carefully. "And why would I agree to that?" "Because the alternative is watching your throne room turn into a slaughterhouse. Cedric will die fighting. I will die beside him. Your guards will kill us both. But how many of them will he take down first? 10? 20? How much blood are you willing to spill to prove a point?" The king's jaw tightened. "You presume to negotiate? I presume to offer you the one thing you want more than revenge. Stability. Let Cedric go and the North will never rise against you again. Kill him and you turn him into a martyr. Every lord who hated him will suddenly remember why they feared him, and that fear will become rebellion." The throne room fell silent. Aldrich looked at Cedric. "Is this what you want, Raventhorn? To hide behind a woman while she bargains for your life?" Kadric felt something inside him finally break. Not the rage, not the control. The thing that had kept him from being human for 13 years. No, he said quietly. I want her to live. Everything else is negotiable. Even your pride? Especially my pride. Aldrich studied them both for a long moment, then he smiled. Very well. Lady Seraphina, you will remain here as my guest. Duke Raventhorn, you will leave the capital immediately. You will not return to Blackmoor. You will not raise arms against the crown. You will simply disappear into whatever hole you choose to die in. And if I refuse, then my guards will kill you both, and I will burn Blackmoor to the foundation stones. Kadric looked at Seraphina. She was crying silently, her hand reaching for his. Go, she whispered. Please. Not without you, Kadric. I spent 13 years choosing power over everything else. I am not making that mistake again. He turned back to the king. New terms. Let her go. Take me instead. Whatever punishment you want. Execution, torture. Lock me in the darkest cell you have and forget I exist. But she walks out of here free. Aldrich's smile widened. No. Then you get neither of us alive. Kadric raised his sword. The guards surged forward, and Seraphina threw herself between them. Stop! She screamed. Everything froze. She stood in the center of the throne room with tears streaming down her face and her hands raised. Please, she said. Please, your majesty. I am begging you. Let him go. He has already lost everything. His castle, his title, his power. He came here knowing he would die just to give me the choice he should have offered from the beginning. That is not the action of a tyrant. That is the action of someone who finally learned what it means to love someone more than himself. Aldrich's expression softened slightly. You love him. It was not a question. Yes. Even knowing what he is, especially knowing what he is, because I also know what he could become if someone gave him the chance. The king was silent for a long moment. Then he waved his hand and the guard stepped back. You are a fool, Lady Seraphina. I know. And you, Duke Raventhorn, are the luckiest man in this kingdom. Kadric said nothing. Aldrich descended from his throne and approached them slowly. Here are my final terms. You both leave. Tonight, together. You will be escorted to the northern borders and released. But if either of you ever return to Valadorn, if I hear even a whisper that you are attempting to reclaim what you lost, I will hunt you down personally and make sure your deaths are public enough to be remembered for generations. Kadric looked at Seraphina. She looked back. And for the first time in 13 years, he chose to walk away from power. We accept, he said. Aldrich nodded to his guards. Escort them out. Make sure they reach the border alive. After that, they are no longer my problem. The guards surrounded them. Kadric and Seraphina were led through the palace and out into the night where horses waited. They rode through the capital in silence, past the city walls, through the forest, toward the border where the kingdom ended and the rest of the world began. And somewhere in the darkness, with everything he had built crumbling behind him, Kadric reached across the space between their horses and found Seraphina's hand. She gripped it like a lifeline. I am sorry, he said. For what? For taking so long to understand. Understand what? That loving you was never about keeping you. It was about being willing to let you go. She smiled through her tears. Then maybe we can start over. Somewhere far from here. Somewhere that does not know who we were. Who we were, she repeated. Not who we are? No, Kadric said quietly, because I have no idea who I am without Blackmoor. Then I guess we will figure it out together. They crossed the border as dawn broke across the mountains. Behind them, the kingdom that had made them into monsters continued without caring. Ahead, the world stretched open and terrifying and filled with the possibility of becoming something other than what survival had demanded. Kadric looked at Seraphina riding beside him and felt the weight of 13 years finally lift. He had lost everything, his castle, his title, his power, his legacy. But he had gained the one thing that mattered, a chance to be human again, and that would have to be enough. Freedom tasted like ash and regret. 3 weeks beyond the border, Kadric and Seraphina existed in a village so small it did not have a name, just a collection of wooden houses clustered around a frozen stream where fishermen broke ice each morning to pull out catches barely worth the effort. The people here did not ask questions, did not care about politics or kingdoms or the names that once carried weight across territories now reduced to memory. They rented a room above a stable. One window, one bed, walls so thin they could hear the horses breathing below. Caedric stood at that window every morning and watched the sun rise over mountains that belonged to no one, and felt the absence of Blackmore like a missing limb. Seraphina tried to make it bearable. She cooked meals over a fire that never heated properly, mended clothes worn thin from weeks on the road, spoke about futures that might exist somewhere beyond the edge of this frozen nothing. But at night, when she thought he was sleeping, he heard her crying. Not from sadness, from the terrible knowledge that she had traded one cage for another. Caedric knew because he felt it too. The suffocating weight of surviving without purpose, of waking each day to nothing except more days exactly the same. This was not living. This was just waiting to die with extra steps and better company. On the 21st morning, a rider arrived. Caedric was splitting wood behind the stable when he saw the horse approaching through the snow. Military trained, too expensive for this region. The rider wore no colors but moved with the posture of someone who had spent years in uniform. Garrick dismounted and crossed the yard without hesitation. Caedric set down the axe. "You should not be here, Commander." "I know. If Aldrich discovers you came, he already knows. He sent me." The words landed like a physical blow. Garrick pulled a sealed letter from his coat. The royal crest marked the wax, but something about it looked wrong. Burned at the edges, stained with what might have been blood. "Blackmore has fallen," Garrick said quietly. Caedric's hands went numb. "When?" 4 days ago. Lord Ashford opened the gates from inside. The king's forces poured through before dawn. They killed everyone who resisted and imprisoned the rest. The castle is occupied. The northern territories have been absorbed into the crown's direct control. And our people? Dead or scattered. The servants fled into the mountains. The soldiers who refused to surrender were executed in the courtyard where you once held council. Caedric felt something cold settle into his chest where rage used to live. Not fury. Something colder. More final. "Why did Aldrich send you to tell me this?" Garrick's jaw tightened. "Because Ashford is petitioning the king to be named the new Duke of Blackmore. He claims he can stabilize the north where you failed. Aldrich is considering it. Let him." The commander's expression hardened. "Your Grace..." "I am not a duke anymore, Garrick. I am a man who splits wood for coin and sleeps in a room that smells like horse shit. Blackmore is gone. Let Ashford have what is left." "Is that truly what you believe?" Caedric looked at him directly. "What I believe does not matter. I made a choice. I chose her over power. And I would make that choice again. Even knowing it would cost you everything? Especially knowing that." Garrick was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled a second letter from his coat. This one had no seal. Just folded parchment stained with dirt and what looked like smoke damage. This arrived at what remains of Blackmore 3 days ago. It was addressed to you. From who? The people you abandoned. Caedric took the letter with hands that shook. He unfolded it and read words written in a dozen different scripts. Servants, soldiers, villagers from the territories surrounding the castle, all of them saying the same thing. "Come back. We are dying under Ashford's rule. He executes anyone who questions him, takes food from families already starving, uses the king's authority to justify cruelty that makes your worst days look merciful by comparison. Come back. We do not care that you lost. We do not care that you have no title or army or claim to power. We care that you were ours and we were yours, and that meant something even when it was brutal. Come back. Because whatever you were never Ashford." Caedric read the letter twice, then a third time. Looked up at Garrick with something dangerous building behind his eyes. "How many would follow me if I returned?" The commander's expression shifted. Every soldier who survived the occupation, every servant who escaped into the mountains, every village that remembers what Blackmore meant before Aldrich carved it into pieces. "How many?" 300. Maybe more if we move fast. Against how many of the king's forces? 2,000 garrisoned at the castle. Another 5,000 within 3 days' march, if they call for reinforcements. Caedric looked down at the letter in his hands. "This is suicide." "Yes, Your Grace. We would be attacking a fortified position with a fraction of the forces needed to succeed." "Yes. And even if we won, Aldrich would send his entire army north to crush us. Almost certainly. Then why are you here, Commander? Because you taught me that survival is not the same as living. And right now, everyone who followed you is dying slowly under a man who believes cruelty is strategy. Garrick stepped closer. You asked me once what separated you from your father. I told you it was that you knew when to stop. But I was wrong. What separates you is that you are willing to admit when you failed. Your father would have let Blackmore burn rather than admit weakness. You walked away because you thought that was strength. And now? Now I am asking you to come back. Not because we need a duke, but because we need someone who remembers that power is supposed to protect people, not just control them. The words settled into Cadrick's chest like stones. He turned and walked back toward the stable, climbed the stairs to the room where Seraphina sat mending a shirt by the window. She looked up when he entered, saw his face, set down the needle. What happened? Cadrick handed her the letter without speaking. She read it in silence. Her expression shifted through shock and grief and something that looked like inevitability. When she finished, she set the letter down carefully. You are going back. It was not a question. I have to. No, you do not. You could stay here. We could disappear further into the mountains where no one would ever find us. We could build something small and safe and far from all of this. Seraphina, is that not what you wanted? To stop being the monster? To choose love over power? Cadrick crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, took her hands in his. 3 weeks ago, I thought choosing you meant walking away from everything else. I thought love required sacrifice, that I had to become something softer to deserve you. And now I understand that loving you was never about becoming less. It was about becoming whole. You did not need me to stop being dangerous. You needed me to start using that danger to protect instead of control. He squeezed her hands gently. Blackmore is dying. The people who trusted me are being slaughtered by a coward wearing my title like stolen clothes. And I can stop it. I can go back and I can fight, and maybe I will die trying. But at least I will die as someone who chose to stand for something instead of just surviving. Tears tracked down Seraphina's face. I did not fall in love with you so you could throw your life away on a suicide mission. I know. You fell in love with me because you saw who I could become. And this is who that is. Not a tyrant, not a monster, just someone willing to bleed for the people who have no one else to fight for them. She pulled her hands free and stood, walked to the window, stared out at the frozen nothing beyond. When she finally spoke, her voice came out steady despite the tears. If you go back, I go with you. No. Yes, Seraphina, this is war. Real war. Not politics or negotiations, blood and steel and watching people die badly. I know. Then you understand why I cannot take you. She turned to face him. Do you remember what you said to me in the throne room, that you were done choosing power over everything else? Yes. Then do not choose to protect me now by leaving me behind. I am not some fragile thing that needs to be locked away for safekeeping. I am the woman who walked into your castle and called you a coward, who challenged you in front of your entire council, who went to the capital to save your life even when you did not want saving. Her voice rose. If you go back to Blackmore, you go with me beside you. Not behind you, not waiting somewhere safe. Beside you. Because that is what it means to choose each other. Cadrick stood slowly, looked at her standing in the weak winter light with fire in her eyes and stubbornness carved into every line of her body, and realized she was absolutely right. He had spent 13 years trying to protect people by controlling them, had confused safety with possession, freedom with abandonment. But Seraphina was not asking for protection. She was demanding partnership. The difference was everything. All right, he said quietly. We go together. She crossed the room and kissed him hard enough to bruise. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. Are we going to die doing this? Probably. Good. I would rather die fighting beside you than live safely without you. They rode north with Garrick and 50 soldiers who had survived the occupation by hiding in villages too small for the king's forces to bother searching. The journey took 4 days through mountain passes that tried to kill them with every mile. Avalanches, frozen rivers, winds that tore at exposed skin like knives. Cadrick pushed them harder than was safe because time was the only advantage they had. Ashford would not expect an attack. The new duke believed Cadrick was broken, exiled, neutered. He would be drinking wine in the hall that once belonged to House Raventhorn, while servants who hated him pretended obedience and waited for something to change. They were about to get exactly that. On the 5th day, they reached the cliffs overlooking Blackmoor Keep. The castle looked different under occupation. Royal banners flew where Raventhorn colors once snapped in the wind. Guards patrolled the battlements in formations too rigid for the north. Everything about it felt wrong. Foreign. Like watching a corpse wearing your face. Cadric stood at the overlook with Seraphina beside him and Garrick on his other side. 300 people had answered the call. Soldiers who remembered what loyalty meant. Servants who had nowhere else to go. Villagers who understood that Ashford's rule meant slow death through starvation and brutality. They gathered in the forest below the cliffs with weapons cobbled together from whatever they could find. Swords, axes, farming tools sharpened into something lethal. Not an army, a rebellion. Cedric looked at the faces staring up at him and saw exhaustion and hope and the particular desperation of people who had decided that dying on their feet was better than living on their knees. He understood that feeling intimately. When he spoke, his voice carried through the trees without shouting. 3 weeks ago, I walked away from Blackmoor because I believed choosing love over power was the same as choosing peace. I was wrong. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of justice. And there is no justice in what has happened to our home. He gestured toward the castle. Lord Ashford sits in my hall and believes he has won. He believes fear makes him strong. That cruelty equals control. He believes you are broken. Cadric's hand moved to the sword at his hip. Prove him wrong. The forest erupted into harsh whispers of agreement. Cadric turned to Garrick. The passages? Still accessible. Ashford does not know about the tunnels beneath the eastern wall. How many can we move through at once? 30. Maybe 40 if they do not mind getting intimate with stone. Do it. Take half our people through the tunnels and position them near the armory. When you hear fighting in the courtyard, open the gates from inside. And you, Your Grace? I will take the remaining half through the main approach. Make enough noise that Ashford pulls his guards forward to defend the entrance. That gives you time to move through the tunnels unopposed. It is a good plan, Garrick said quietly, except for the part where you die in the courtyard before we can open the gates. Then do not take too long, Commander. Garrick studied him for a moment. It has been an honor serving you, my lord. Save the sentiments for after we win. And if we do not win, then say them at my funeral. Garrick smiled grimly and moved down the hill to organize the tunnel team. Seraphina remained at Caedric's side. You are really going to charge the front gates with 150 people against 2,000 trained soldiers? Yes. That is insane. Probably. You could die in the first 5 minutes. I am aware. She was quiet for a moment. Then I am staying with you. Absolutely not. We had this conversation already, Cadric. You do not get to leave me behind. This is different. The front assault is suicide. I am leading it because someone has to, and these people will not follow anyone else. But you... Her hand covered his mouth. Stop. Just stop. You think I survived 3 weeks in exile and 4 days riding through frozen hell to watch you walk into your death alone? You think I came all this way to stand in the trees while you charged the castle that tried to break both of us? She pulled her hand away. I am fighting beside you. End of discussion. Caedric looked at her standing there covered in road dust and exhaustion, with absolute certainty burning in her eyes. He could order her to stay, could have Garrick physically restrain her, could do a dozen things that would keep her out of the battle and guarantee she survived long enough to mourn him properly. But that would make him exactly what he spent 13 years becoming, a man who believed love meant control. So instead, he did the only thing that made sense. He kissed her, soft and slow and full of everything he had never learned how to say with words. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. If we survive this, when we survive this, I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. She smiled through tears. I already do not regret it, even knowing what comes next. They attacked at dawn when the light was weakest and the guards were changing shifts. Caedric led 150 people down the cliffs toward Blackmoor's main gates with nothing except raw momentum and the desperate hope that Garrick could move fast enough through the tunnels to matter. The first guards saw them when they were still 200 yards out. Horns blared across the courtyard. Soldiers poured out of the barracks. Cedric did not slow. He hit the defensive line like something carved from violence itself. His sword found throats and hearts with the precision of someone who had spent 13 years learning exactly where steel needed to go to end lives quickly. Around him, his people fought with the ferocity of those who had nothing left to lose. Farmers drove pitchforks through armor. Servants swung kitchen knives like daggers. Former soldiers moved in coordinated strikes that proved muscle memory survived exile. But they were outnumbered 10-1. For every guard that fell, 3 more appeared. The courtyard turned into a slaughterhouse. Blood slicked the stones, bodies piled in heaps. Screams echoed off walls that had witnessed 6 generations of violence, but never anything this desperate. Kaedric fought beside Seraphina, watched her drive a stolen sword through a guard's chest and pull it free without hesitation, saw her take a shallow cut across her shoulder and barely flinch before turning to block the next attack. She was magnificent, terrifying, everything he never knew he needed. A crossbow bolt whistled past his head and embedded in the man behind him. Kaedric spun and threw his dagger. It caught the archer in the throat. He retrieved a fallen sword and kept moving forward, inches at a time, yards when they were lucky. But the gates were still closed, and Garrick had not appeared. They had maybe 5 minutes before the sheer weight of numbers crushed them completely. Kaedric grabbed a soldier near him. Fall back to the walls, defensive formation, make them work for every foot. The soldier nodded and relayed the order. Kaedric's people contracted into a tight circle near the castle walls. Shields locked, spears forward. The most basic defensive strategy in existence, but it bought them seconds that felt like hours. A guard captain pushed through the crowd and leveled a sword at Kaedric. "Surrender, and I promise a quick death." Kaedric smiled without warmth. "I have been promised quick deaths before. They never work out the way people expect." He closed the distance, and their blades met with enough force to send sparks cascading. They traded strikes faster than thought. The captain was good, trained, experienced. But Kaedric had spent 13 years surviving attempts from better killers. He disarmed the captain with a twist that broke fingers and drove his sword through the gap in his armor below the ribs. The man fell choking on his own blood. And somewhere in the distance, Kaedric heard the sound he had been waiting for. The grinding shriek of iron gates opening from inside. Garrick had reached the armory. Kaedric's people surged forward with renewed fury. They crashed through the broken defensive line and poured into the castle proper. Corridor fighting, room by room, brutal and close and merciless. Seraphina stayed at Kaedric's side through all of it, covered his blind spots, called out threats he could not see, fought like someone who had spent weeks watching him survive and learned every move by heart. They reached the Great Hall to find Ashford standing at the far end with 50 guards surrounding him. The coward had not even tried to fight. Kaedric crossed the hall slowly. Blood dripped from his sword. His armor was torn in 3 places. A shallow cut across his ribs burned with every breath. But he was still standing, still moving forward. Ashford's face went pale. "You're supposed to be in exile." "I was. Then I decided to come home. This is not your home anymore, Raventhorn. King Aldrich stripped you of your title. I am the Duke of Blackmore now." Kaedric stopped 10 feet away. "You want to know the difference between you and me, Ashford?" "What?" "I earned this title by bleeding for it. You bought it by betraying everyone who ever trusted you. And these people remember the difference." He gestured around the hall. Guards who had served under Kaedric for years. Servants who had watched him transform from tyrant to something almost human. Soldiers who remembered what loyalty meant before Ashford made it transactional. One by one, they lowered their weapons, turned their backs on Ashford, and knelt to Kaedric, not because he demanded it, because they chose it. Ashford's expression twisted into fury and desperation. He lunged forward with the dagger pulled from his belt. Kaedric did not move. Seraphina stepped between them and drove her sword through Ashford's chest before he could close the distance. The traitor fell to his knees. Blood bubbled from his mouth. He looked up at her with shock written across his face. We're never going to let you hurt him again," she finished. Ashford collapsed. The hall fell silent. Kaedric looked at Seraphina standing over the body with her sword still dripping red. She met his gaze without flinching. "I told you I was fighting beside you. That includes the killing." He crossed to her and pulled her against him, held on while the adrenaline bled out, and exhaustion crashed over them both. Around them, the hall slowly filled with people. Garrick and his team from the tunnels. Soldiers who had survived the courtyard assault. servants emerging from hiding places throughout the castle. They looked at Kaedric and Seraphina standing in the center of the hall, covered in blood and ash, and waited for someone to tell them what came next. Kaedric released Seraphina and turned to face them. Blackmoor is ours again. But that does not mean we are safe. King Aldrich will send his armies when he hears what happened here. We have days, maybe a week if we are lucky. What do we do, Your Grace? A soldier called out. Kaedric looked around the hall, at the people who had followed him into impossible odds, who had chosen him despite every reason to walk away. We prepare. We fortify. We gather every ally we can find, and we make Aldrich understand that the North will never bend the knee again. Not to him, not to anyone. And if he comes anyway, then we fight, like we did today, like we always have, because that is what it means to be Blackmoor. The hall erupted into harsh shouts of agreement. Garrick approached. Your Grace! Scouts report movement from the southern provinces, large forces mobilizing. Aldrich knows what happened. How long? 4 days. Maybe 5. Kaedric nodded. Then we have 4 days to turn this castle back into the fortress it was meant to be. He looked at Seraphina. And 4 days to decide if we are willing to die for this. She took his hand. We already made that choice when we rode north. Everything else is just details. Outside the hall, dawn broke across Blackmoor Keep with light that turned the snow gold and made the castle walls look almost beautiful. For a moment, Kaedric stood there and felt what it meant to come home. Not to a place, to a purpose. Then the moment passed and reality crashed back. War was coming. Not the kind that could be won through strategy or superior numbers. The kind that ended with either complete victory or total annihilation. And somewhere in the capital, King Aldrich was preparing to teach the North exactly what happened to people who defied him twice. Kaedric looked at the faces surrounding him. At Seraphina standing beside him covered in blood and determination. At Garrick, waiting for orders that would probably get them all killed. At the castle that had been his prison and his kingdom and the only home he had ever known. And he made the choice that would define everything that came after. Not survival, war. Real war. The kind where mercy was weakness and compassion meant death. And the only thing that mattered was whether you were still standing when the dust settled. Kaedric's hand tightened on his sword. Send messengers to every village in the north. Tell them Duke Kaedric Raventhorn has returned to Blackmoor. Tell them we are calling every able body to defend what is ours. And tell them that anyone who stands with us will be remembered forever. And those who stand against us, Garrick asked, will not live long enough to regret it. The commander nodded and moved to relay orders. Seraphina stepped closer. There is no walking away from this, she said quietly. Once Aldrich's armies arrive, we are committed. I know. We could still run. Take a ship from the coast and disappear where he would never find us. We could, but you will not. No. Why? Kaedric looked at her directly. Because 13 years ago I became Duke of Blackmoor by killing my father, and I spent every day since then trying to prove I was different, stronger, better. But all I did was become a different version of the same monster. He took her hand. You showed me that strength is not about never breaking. It is about what you do after you have been broken. And I broke completely when I walked away from these people. So now I am choosing to stand. Not because I think we can win, but because they deserve someone who will not abandon them when survival becomes difficult. Seraphina's eyes filled with tears. You are going to get us both killed, probably. And you are still doing this? Yes. Then I guess we die together. She kissed him hard. When they pulled apart, horns were already blaring from the battlements. Scouts returning with news. Garrick appeared at the entrance to the hall with his face grim. Your Grace, you need to see this. They climbed to the battlements and looked south across the frozen landscape, and saw an army stretching to the horizon. Not 4 days away, not 5. Already here. Thousands of soldiers in perfect formation, siege equipment rolling into position, banners flying above a force large enough to swallow Blackmoor whole. At the head of the army, mounted on a white horse, sat King Aldrich himself. He had come personally to watch Blackmoor fall. Kaedric stared at the approaching army and felt the weight of everything settling onto his shoulders. 300 defenders against 10,000 attackers. No reinforcements coming, no escape routes left. Just stone walls and steel and the people willing to die behind them. Beside him, Seraphina gripped his hand. How long do we have? Kedrick looked at the army moving closer with every passing moment. Hours? Maybe less. She nodded once. Then let us make them count. Below, soldiers scrambled to defensive positions. Archers lined the walls. Oil was heated in massive cauldrons. Every weapon in the armory was distributed to anyone who could hold one. Blackmore Keep transformed into exactly what it was always meant to be, a fortress where hope came to die. And at the center of it all stood Kedrick and Seraphina, watching the largest army in the kingdom prepare to destroy everything they had just reclaimed. Garrick appeared beside them one final time. "Final orders, Your Grace?" Kedrick never took his eyes off the approaching army. When they breach the walls, not if when, fall back to the keep itself. Make them fight for every room, every corridor, every inch. And if I fall before it is over, you take command and you keep fighting until there is nothing left to fight with. And Lady Seraphina? Kedrick looked at her. She stays with me. Until the end. Seraphina's hand tightened around his. Until the end, she repeated. The army reached the base of the cliffs. Siege equipment moved into position, and King Aldrich's voice echoed across the battlefield loud enough to reach the battlements. Duke Raventhorn, you have one chance to surrender. Open the gates and I promise a quick death for you and exile for your people. Refuse, and I will burn Blackmore to ash with everyone inside. Kedrick looked at Seraphina. She looked back, and together they made the choice that would end with either legend or oblivion. Kedrick's voice carried across the battlefield in response. Come and take it. The siege began, and Blackmore Keep prepared to write the final chapter of a dynasty built on blood. The first wave hit the walls like thunder made of steel, and screaming, Kedrick stood on the battlements with his sword drawn and watched 10,000 soldiers surge toward Blackmore Keep with the mechanical precision of men who knew they outnumbered the defenders 30-1. Siege towers rolled forward on wheels taller than houses. Battering rams swung on chains thick enough to anchor warships. Archers darkened the sky with volleys that fell like iron rain. Beside him, Seraphina gripped a crossbow with hands steady enough to make him wonder if she had been doing this her entire life instead of learning as she went. She fired, reloaded, fired again. Each bolt found flesh. Down the wall, his people fought with the desperate fury of those who understood this was not a battle they could win through skill or strategy. This was survival measured in heartbeats. Every second they held the walls was another second someone might live. The first siege tower reached the battlements on the eastern wall. Enemy soldiers poured across the gap like ants flooding toward sugar. Kedrick's defenders met them with steel and determination, but the numbers were impossible. For every attacker that fell, 3 more appeared behind them. Kedrick moved down the wall toward the breach, cut through soldiers with the efficiency of someone who had spent 13 years learning exactly how violence worked when applied correctly. His blade opened throats, severed hands gripping ladders, found gaps in armor where organs lived. Around him, his people died. Not dramatically. Not with speeches or final words. They just stopped fighting and fell and were trampled by the next wave of attackers surging forward. A young soldier named Thomas went down with an arrow through his eye. The cook who had fed Kedrick breakfast every morning for 8 years took a spear through the gut and died choking on his own blood. A servant girl barely 16 stumbled off the wall with her arm severed at the elbow. This was war. Not the cleaned-up version told in songs or celebrated in paintings. The real thing. Brutal and ugly and absolutely merciless. Kedrick fought until his arms burned and his lungs screamed and blood covered him so thoroughly he could not tell anymore what was his and what belonged to the people trying to kill him. Then the eastern wall fell completely. Garrick appeared through the chaos with ash in his hair and a sword broken halfway down the blade. Fall back to the keep, Your Grace. We cannot hold the walls. How many? Half. Maybe less. Kedrick looked at the courtyard filling with enemy soldiers and felt the weight of every decision that had led to this moment settle onto his shoulders like stones. Sound the retreat. Garrick raised a horn and blew 3 sharp blasts. The defenders still alive broke contact and ran for the main keep. Enemy soldiers chased them across the courtyard. Arrows fell. Men screamed. Bodies piled at the bottleneck where the keep's entrance forced everyone into single file. Kedrick and Seraphina were the last through the doors. Guards slammed them shut and dropped the iron bar across. Seconds later, the battering ram hit with enough force to rattle teeth. Inside the keep, the remaining defenders gathered in the great hall. Maybe 100 people still standing, covered in blood and ash. eyes hollow with exhaustion, and the particular emptiness that came from watching friends die badly. Cedric climbed onto the dais where his family had ruled for 6 generations and looked at the faces staring up at him. These were not soldiers anymore. They were ghosts waiting for permission to stop fighting. "The walls are gone," he said. His voice carried through the hall without shouting. "The courtyard is theirs. Within the hour, they will breach these doors and flood this hall. We do not have the numbers to hold them." Silence stretched. Then a soldier near the back spoke. "So what do we do, Your Grace?" Cedric looked at Seraphina standing beside him, at Garrick positioned near the entrance, at the people who had followed him into impossible odds because they believed he was worth dying for. And he made the hardest choice of his life. "We surrender." The word hit like a physical blow. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Disbelief, confusion, anger. "Your Grace," Garrick said quietly, "if we surrender, Aldrich will execute you publicly. He will make an example that the entire kingdom will remember." "I know." "Then why?" "Because I am done watching you die for me." Cedric stepped down from the dais and moved through the hall, touched shoulders, met eyes, spoke directly to people whose names he had memorized over 13 years of ruling them. "You followed me here because you believed I would protect you. And I failed. I led you into a battle we could not win because my pride demanded one final stand. But pride is not worth your lives." He stopped in the center of the hall. "So I am surrendering to King Aldrich, personally, and I am asking him for terms that spare everyone in this hall." "He will never agree," someone called out. "Then I will make him agree. Whatever it takes." Seraphina's voice cut through from behind him. "No." He turned. She stood on the dais with tears streaming down her face and absolute fury burning in her eyes. "You do not get to do this," she said. "You do not get to sacrifice yourself and call it protection. That is just control wearing a different mask." Cedric walked back toward her slowly. "What would you have me do, Seraphina? Watch everyone in this hall die because I refuse to admit when I have lost? I would have you fight, like you always have, like you taught me to. We are out of options." "No. We are out of walls and soldiers and time, but we are not out of choices." She descended from the dais until she stood directly in front of him. "You spent 13 years believing survival required sacrificing your humanity. Then you spent 3 weeks believing love required sacrificing your purpose. But you were wrong both times." Her hand found his. "Strength is not about choosing one over the other. It is about finding a way to hold both. And if you surrender now, if you let Aldrich execute you while I watch, you are not protecting me. You are abandoning me." Again. The words landed harder than any blade. Cedric looked at her standing there, covered in ash and blood, with conviction radiating from every line of her body, and realized she was right. Again. He had spent his entire life trapped between 2 impossible choices: control or chaos, power or love, victory or surrender. Every decision forced into binary options that left no room for the complexity of actually being human. But Seraphina was showing him a third path: not surrender, not suicide, something else entirely. He turned back to face the hall. "New plan. We hold the keep as long as possible, but we are not fighting to win anymore. We are fighting to buy time." "For what, Your Grace?" "For me to do something I should have done the moment Aldrich arrived. Talk to him." Barquets. The battering ram hit the keep doors 17 more times before Cedric finally opened them himself. He walked out alone with his hands empty and his sword left behind in the hall, crossed the courtyard through the wreckage of bodies and broken siege equipment. Soldiers surrounded him immediately but did not strike. They had orders to bring him to the king alive. Smart. Aldrich wanted the execution public, wanted the entire kingdom to watch what happened to people who defied him twice. They dragged Cedric through the castle he had spent 13 years ruling and threw him on the floor in front of the throne that once belonged to his family. King Aldrich sat above him, wearing the particular satisfaction of a man who had finally won something that mattered. Duke Raventhorn, how the mighty have fallen. Cedric stayed on his knees. Not from submission, from strategy. "Your Majesty, I have come to offer terms." Aldrich laughed. "You are in no position to offer anything. Your walls have fallen. Your people are trapped inside a keep that will be ashes by nightfall. And you are about to die slowly enough that everyone remembers why kingdoms do not defy their kings." Kadric looked up and met Aldrich's eyes directly. You want my death, I understand. I killed your advisor, defied your authority, returned from exile to reclaim what you took from me. Any king would demand blood for that. Then you understand why negotiation is pointless. No, I understand why it is necessary. Kadric rose slowly to his feet, guards tensed, hands moved to weapons. He ignored them. You can execute me right now. Make it as brutal as you want. Hang me. Behead me. Burn me alive in the courtyard where I once held council. The entire kingdom will see what happens to people who challenge the crown. Aldrich's eyes narrowed. Or you can use me to build something better. The king leaned forward. Explain. Kadric gestured toward the windows overlooking the courtyard. Right now, the North hates you. They see occupation, brutality, a southern king crushing northern independence. And that hatred will fester. It will breed rebellion. In 5 years, maybe 10, someone else will rise up and you will be fighting this same war again. And your alternative? Make me your example differently. Not through execution, through rehabilitation. Aldrich's expression shifted. You want mercy. No. I want purpose. Assign me to the most dangerous, thankless work in the kingdom. Border conflicts, disputed territories, places where soldiers die in mud-fighting battles no one remembers. Let me spend the rest of my life bleeding for the crown in ways that prove power can be redirected instead of just destroyed. Why would I trust you to do that? Because I am tired, Your Majesty. Tired of fighting, tired of losing people, tired of waking up every morning and calculating who needs to die to keep everyone else alive. I do not want power anymore. I just want to stop watching people suffer because I could not figure out how to be both strong and human. The throne room fell silent. Aldrich studied him for a long moment. And if I agree to this arrangement, what happens to Blackmore? Assign it to someone competent. Someone who understands that ruling means protecting people, not just controlling them. Let the North govern itself as much as possible while still answering to the crown. And most importantly, spare everyone still alive in that keep. They followed me into this mess. They do not deserve to die for my mistakes. The king was quiet. Then he stood and descended from the throne until he faced Kadric directly. You are either the most manipulative man I have ever met or the most genuine. I cannot decide which. Does it matter? Yes. Because if I believe you and I am wrong, you will use whatever freedom I grant to stab me in the back the moment my guard is down. Kadric met his gaze without flinching. Then do not give me freedom, Your Majesty. Give me chains. Assign me a handler, monitor every decision I make. But give me the chance to prove that redemption is possible even for monsters. Aldrich's hand moved to Kadric's shoulder. Why do I believe you actually mean that? Because 3 weeks ago, I walked away from everything I built to save one person. And today, I am surrendering everything I am to save 100 more. At some point, the pattern stops being strategy and starts being character. The king nodded slowly. Very well, Duke Raventhorn. I accept your terms. You will serve the crown in whatever capacity I assign for the remainder of your life. Blackmore will be administered by someone I trust, and the people in that keep will be spared. Kadric felt something inside his chest finally unclench. Thank you, Your Majesty. Do not thank me yet. The work I am about to assign you is the kind that breaks men faster than execution. You may wish I had simply killed you. I will take that risk. Aldrich gestured to his guards. Take him back to the keep. Let him say goodbye to Lady Seraphina. Then we leave for the capital at dawn. The guards escorted Kadric back across the courtyard and into the keep where Seraphina waited in the great hall surrounded by the exhausted defenders who had survived long enough to see him return. She ran to him. He caught her and held on while she shook with relief and fury in equal measure. You did it, she whispered against his chest. Barely. What did he say? That I get to spend the rest of my life trying to prove that people can change. And us? Kadric pulled back just enough to see her face. That depends. On what? On whether you are willing to follow me into a life that will be harder than anything we faced here. No power, no castle. Just work that might kill me before I figure out how to do it correctly. Seraphina smiled through tears. I followed you into exile, into war, and into a throne room where we both should have died. What makes you think I would stop now? He kissed her. Soft and slow and full of promises he intended to spend the rest of his life keeping. When they pulled apart, Garrick approached. Your Grace, what are your orders? Kadric looked around the hall at the faces watching him. These people were not his anymore. Not really. Aldrich would assign a new administrator. Life would continue. Blackmore would survive without him. And somehow, that felt exactly right. Tell them the siege is over. Tell them they are free to rebuild their lives however they choose. And tell them that I am sorry for every time I confused protecting them with controlling them. Garrick's expression softened. It has been the greatest honor of my life serving you, my lord. The honor was mine, Commander. They clasped forearms. Then Kaedric and Seraphina walked out of Blackmore Keep together under armed escort and did not look back. Bold. The work King Aldrich assigned was exactly as brutal as promised. Kaedric spent the next 3 years on the western borders, mediating disputes between provinces that had been killing each other for generations. He negotiated treaties, settled land claims, stopped skirmishes before they became wars. The work was thankless, exhausting. Most days ended with him covered in mud and blood from breaking up fights between people who would hate him regardless of whose side he took. But it was honest. No politics, no manipulation, just the raw machinery of trying to keep people alive long enough to solve their problems through words instead of steel. Seraphina worked beside him, not behind him, not following orders. Beside him as an equal partner who understood the weight of what they were trying to build. They lived in a tent that leaked when it rained, ate rations that barely qualified as food, slept on ground so hard it left bruises, and somehow it felt more like home than Blackmore ever had. On the morning of the 3rd anniversary of the surrender, a messenger arrived from the capital. Kaedric read the letter while sitting on a log outside their tent, watching dawn break over a disputed river valley that 3 families claimed ownership of. Seraphina emerged and sat beside him. What does it say? That King Aldrich has officially pardoned me. My service is complete. We are free to go wherever we choose. She leaned against his shoulder. Where do you want to go? Kaedric thought about Blackmore, about the castle carved into cliffs above a frozen sea, about the throne room where his father died and the battlements where he watched kingdoms rise and fall. Then he thought about this valley, about the work waiting to be done, about the people who needed someone willing to stand between violence and solutions. Nowhere, he said quietly. This is exactly where I want to be. Seraphina's hand found his. No regrets? About losing Blackmore? About giving up power? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. I spent 13 years believing I needed control to survive. That power was the only thing separating me from the chaos that killed my father. But I was wrong. Power did not protect me. It just isolated me until I became exactly what I was trying to avoid. He looked at her. You showed me that strength is not about dominating others. It is about being vulnerable enough to admit when you are wrong and disciplined enough to change anyway. That is harder than any battle I ever fought. What about now? What do you want? Kaedric watched the sun climb higher and thought about all the years ahead. About the disputes to settle and the conflicts to mediate and the endless work of trying to make the world slightly less terrible, one small decision at a time. I want to keep doing this. Not because I have to, because I choose to. Because for the first time in my life, the work I am doing actually matters in ways that have nothing to do with my own survival. Seraphina kissed his temple. Then we stay. They sat together in the quiet morning and watched the valley wake up. Farmers emerged to check livestock. Fishermen cast nets into the disputed river. Children played in dirt yards while their parents argued over boundaries that had been contested for 3 generations. Normal life. Messy and complicated and completely unglamorous. And Kaedric understood finally what he had been searching for all along. Not power, not control, not even peace. Just the chance to be useful without being feared. To stand for something that would outlast him. To love someone without needing to possess them. To wake up each morning and choose to be better than the person he was the day before. That was enough. More than enough. Years passed. The work continued. Some disputes were resolved. Others festered. Kaedric learned that progress was not linear and change was not dramatic. It was the slow accumulation of small decisions made consistently over time. He stopped counting victories and defeats, started measuring success by whether people were still alive to argue about their problems tomorrow. Seraphina became known throughout the western provinces as someone who could see through lies and identify solutions that satisfied no one completely but kept everyone breathing. She negotiated treaties that held longer than anyone expected and trained younger mediators in the art of listening before speaking. Together, they built something that was not a kingdom or an empire or anything that would be remembered in history books. Just a functional system that worked slightly better than the chaos it replaced. On the morning of Caedric's 45th birthday, they sat beside a fire outside their tent and drank terrible wine while rain hammered the canvas above. Seraphina was reading a letter from Garrick. The commander had retired to a village near where Blackmore once stood and spent his days teaching children how to defend themselves without becoming what they fought against. He says the North is stable, she said. Aldrich's administrator is competent. People are rebuilding. Life goes on. Caedric poked at the fire with a stick. Do you miss it? She asked. Sometimes. Not the power. Just the feeling of having a purpose that was clear and uncomplicated. Go here. Conquer this. Solve that. The work we do now is so much messier. But better? He looked at her across the firelight. She was older now, lines around her eyes from squinting into too many suns, gray threading through her hair, scars on her hands from a decade of work that required using them for more than just holding wine glasses at aristocratic parties. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Yes, he said. Better. She smiled. Do you ever regret choosing me over Blackmore? Every day. Her expression flickered. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. I regret it because I wonder what would have happened if I had been smart enough to choose you earlier. How many people would still be alive? How much suffering I could have prevented? How different my life might have been if I had learned at 20 what I did not figure out until I was 32. So you regret the timing, not the choice. Never the choice. They sat in comfortable silence while the rain continued and the fire burned low. Eventually, Seraphina spoke again. What do you think happens when we die? Caedric considered the question. I think we stop, completely. No afterlife, no judgment. Just the end of consciousness and whatever we left behind in the world we occupied. That is bleak. That is honest. But it also means the only thing that matters is what we do while we are still breathing. The kindness we show, the problems we solve, the people we protect, not because it benefits us, but because it is the right thing to do. He squeezed her hand. Blackmore will crumble eventually. The castle will fall into the sea. Every decision I made as Duke will be forgotten. But somewhere in the western provinces, there are people alive today who would be dead if we had not mediated their conflicts. Children who grew up in peace instead of war. Families who kept their land because we found solutions instead of just imposing power. His voice dropped lower. That legacy is not grand. It will not be sung about or celebrated. But it is real. And it is mine in a way that ruling Blackmore never was. Seraphina leaned against him. I love you, she said. Not the Duke you were. Not the mediator you became. Just you. The person who figured out that being human is harder and more important than being powerful. He kissed the top of her head. I love you too. For seeing what I could not. For refusing to let me hide behind control. For choosing to stand beside me even when standing beside me meant losing everything comfortable and safe. They sat together while the fire died and the rain slowed and the world continued turning without caring about their existence. And Caedric felt something he had not experienced in over 30 years. Contentment. Not happiness. Not the absence of struggle. Just the deep satisfaction that came from knowing he was exactly where he was supposed to be doing exactly what he was meant to do. The boy who killed his father in a throne room carved from stone. The man who built a kingdom through fear and brutality. The Duke who lost everything and discovered that losing everything was the only way to find what actually mattered. That story was complete now. Not because it ended with victory or redemption or some neat resolution that tied everything together, but because he had finally learned the one lesson that took a lifetime to understand. That strength was not about conquering others. It was about conquering yourself. And some battles were worth fighting even when you knew you would never completely win. The rain stopped. Dawn approached. And in a tent that leaked and smelled like smoke and old canvas, two people who had survived war and exile and the slow erosion of everything they once believed sat together and watched the light return. Not because they had to, because they chose to. And that choice, made new every morning, was the only power that ever really mattered. The end came quietly, not with fanfare or final battles or dramatic pronouncements, just the slow fade that claimed everyone eventually regardless of who they were or what they accomplished. Kedrick died at 53 in a provincial capital while mediating a dispute over water rights between two farming villages. He collapsed mid-sentence, was carried to a physician who could do nothing except confirm what everyone already knew. His heart had simply decided it was finished. Serafina held his hand while he drifted in and out of consciousness for the last few hours. The physician offered to leave them alone. She refused. When Kedrick's eyes finally opened and focused on her face, she leaned close enough that he would not have to strain to hear. "Are you afraid?" she whispered. His voice came out rough and barely audible. "No, just tired. You did good work, Kedrick. You became exactly what you were meant to be." He smiled weakly. "I became what you showed me I could be." "No, I just loved you enough to let you figure it out yourself." His hand tightened around hers with what little strength remained. "Promise me something. Anything. Keep doing this. The work. Not because I asked, because it matters. I promise. And do not let them turn me into a legend. No songs, no paintings. Just let me be a man who tried his best and failed more often than he succeeded." Serafina's tears fell onto their joined hands. "You were never just a man," she said. "You were mine." His eyes closed. Breathing slowed. And somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, Duke Kedrick Raventhorn stopped being anything except a memory that would fade like all memories eventually did. Serafina stayed beside him until morning. Then she stood, washed her face, walked out into a world that continued without caring that someone important had left it. She kept working, kept mediating, kept solving problems, kept teaching younger people how to stand between violence and peace without becoming casualties of either. She lived another 20 years. Died in her sleep in the same tent where she and Kedrick had spent a decade building something that was not a kingdom, but was somehow more important. And when people asked her in those final years what it was like loving a man like Duke Kedrick Raventhorn, she always gave the same answer. It was like watching someone learn to be human after spending a lifetime being a weapon. Difficult, messy, painful, and absolutely worth every moment. Because in the end, that was all any of them were trying to do. Learn to be human in a world that demanded they be monsters. And sometimes, if you were lucky enough and stubborn enough and loved someone fierce enough, you figured it out before it was too late. The story of Blackmore ended not with the fall of a castle or the death of a dynasty, but with two people sitting beside a fire choosing each other over power. That was the only ending that ever mattered, and it was enough.